Good morning and welcome to the April meeting of the Planning Committee. My name is Councillor Jonathan Vinehall, Chairman of the Planning Committee. This meeting is being held remotely and is being live streamed via YouTube, and the recording of it will be available afterwards on our website. Before we continue with the meeting today, I would like to hold a minute's silence as a mark of respect following the death of His Royal Highness Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. So if I could have silence for 1 minute. Thank you very much. Let us continue. So councillors and officers are reminded today to put their mobile phones on silent if they have one near them. Committee members, please leave your cameras on but mute your microphones when not speaking, as this will reduce feedback and background noise and saves bandwidth to prevent any loss of connection. I'll first do a roll call to check that all members who are expected to attend are present. When I say your name, if you could turn your microphone on and confirm your presence. Councillor Mrs. Mary Barnes.
Present.
Now we have Councillor John Barnes substituting for Councillor Gary Curtis today.
Present.
Councillor Sam Coleman.
Present.
Councillor Sarah Errington.
Present.
Councillor Brian Drayson.
Present.
Councillor Tony Gammon.
Present.
Councillor Kathy Harmer.
Present.
Councillor Jonathan Johnson.
Present.
Councillor Chris Madeley.
Present.
Councillor Andrew Mear.
Present.
Councillor Howard Norton.
Present.
Councillor Susan Prochak.
Present.
Councillor Jeanette Stevens.
Present.
Councillor Hazel Tempe.
Present.
The substitutes who are not with us today are Councillor Paul Cortell, Councillor Linda Langlands and Councillor Richard Thomas. Officers joining us. Is Councillor Richard Thomas with us?
Yes, I am present.
Please record for the record. Officers joining us today are Sam Batchelor, the Development Manager, and Sarah Shepherd, the Development Management Team Leader, Mark Cathcart, who's Principal Planning Officer. We have Ben Hook within the meeting, Head of Acquisitions, Stephen Marsden, Development Project Manager, Amy Fern, Housing Development Manager, and the Democratic Services officers today are Julie Holland. So we'll be making decisions by named vote. I also have Councillor Cook present. We have several other councillors present who are ward members. I'll just call their names so you know. Councillor Vicky Cook, Councillor Catherine Field is here. Councillor Kevin Dixon, I believe, is here. Do we have Councillor Jiwon? No. Do we have Councillor Brown? No. All right, that's fine. So if those other members could be recorded. So we'll be making decisions by a named vote. Should any member lose connection, I'll stop the meeting for a couple of minutes to enable the connection to be restored. If your connection can't be restored within 2 minutes, the meeting will proceed and you won't be allowed to vote. Should you lose connection during an application, I'd expect you to advise when it comes to the vote. Members wishing to speak should indicate by typing your surname only in the chat facility, and I will pick those up. Speakers either for or against an application and parish and town council representatives have had the opportunity to register to speak at the meeting. I will call speakers after the officers have presented the application, and there will be an opportunity for members to ask questions of the speakers. Members wishing to ask questions, once again, put your name into the chat facility. We will stop for a comfort break if it's needed at an appropriate time. And on that basis, I'm going to move onto the agenda, and I would ask you if you could authorise me to sign the minutes of the meeting of the 11th of March.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Julie, do we have any apologies? Thank you. Do we have any apologies for absence or substitutes today?
Yes, so Councillor Curtis has given his apologies and Councillor John Barnes is standing in as his substitute. And we've also had apologies from Tim Hickling, the Head of Strategy and Planning.
All right. And do we have any additional items today?
No, there's none.
All right. And we have Councillor Catherine Field has indicated that she wants to speak on Blackfriars, and I do have her listed to speak for that. So do we have any withdrawn applications today?
No, there's none.
And disclosures of interest, I believe we have a couple of disclosures.
Chairman, I must disclose an interest in Blackfriars as the Vice Chairman of Alliance Housing. I am advised that I can stay in the meeting, but I propose to take no part in the discussion.
All right, thank you very much. And Councillor Johnson, you also want to make a declaration.
Thank you, Chairman. I wish to declare a personal and prejudicial interest in agenda item 10, the Granary Woodlands Farm Battle, as I know the father of the applicant well. I shall therefore redeclare my interest when we come to agenda item 10 and leave the meeting.
All right,
thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you very much. We also have Councillor Thomas. Did you have an interest to declare?
Just to say that as Chair of Alliance Housing, I declare an interest in the Blackfriars, but I won't be speaking for the same reason as Councillor Barnes. But I would like the committee to know that I'll be taking very careful note on all that's said. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you for that. Item 6 on the agenda is a planning application list. Councillor Drayson, did you have a declaration you want to make?
Yes, same Director of Alliance Housing. Councillor, it is working. Same Director of Alliance Homes, Rother, but I have no vote in this meeting and I won't be speaking on that subject.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you. So item 6 is the planning list index, and everyone has that. And on that basis, I'm going to move to the first application, which is RR 2020/2307/P, and this is Blackfriars, which is a Rother district application. And once again, we've had the declarations of interest right now, so I don't think it's important to declare it again, but I will just remind the committee that it is Rother district who is the applicant, and in this sense, as the planning committee, we are not acting for Rother District Council, we are acting as the planning authority. And it's very important not to confuse the two things. So if I could hand over to Sam Batchelor, we do have 3 speakers for the applicant, and also the ward members will be speaking. So Sam, can I hand over to you, please?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Sarah Shepherd will actually be presenting this for you this morning, so I'll hand to her.
Yes, good morning, everybody. I'm just going to do the screen share with you so that you can see the details. Is that up in front of everybody now?
Yes.
Yep. Okay, right. This is an application seeking approval for the reserved matters following the grant of outline permission for residential development, which included full permission for the Spine Road for the site known as Blackfriars in Battle. Members have previously visited this site in October 2019 in respect of the outline application that was considered at that time. Outline permission was granted for up to 220 dwellings. It will be noted that the details before you relate to 200 dwellings, which are located within the 3 fields down the western side, as can be seen on the site location plan here. The central woodland ecological wetland valley is to be retained, which is the large area of green space around here and extending into the southeast corner. The remaining 20 dwellings would be subject to a separate further reserved matters application in relation to the blue hatched area over here in the northeastern corner of the site. The reserved matters comprise layout, appearance, landscaping and scale. As part of the layout, details regarding site circulation for vehicles and pedestrians, parking and drainage have also been included. The proposals have been the subject of much discussion and amendment with both planning and design officers, with close regard to the High Weald Housing Design Guide. The route of the spine road through the site, starting at the Spinney and going northwards on the windy path to Harrier Lane in the north, that is as previously approved in the outline stroke full approval that was granted last year after completion of the Section 106 agreement. The layout retains the 3 separate fields which are referred to as Plot 1, the northernmost, Plot 2 in the central area and Plot 3 to the southern area. The central and periphery field boundaries are all retained as previously required under the ecological mitigation and enhancement proposals. Each field or plot has its own character created by the layouts, unit types and materials for that area. The scheme seeks to strengthen the ecological enhancements with a landscaping strategy that incorporates extensive hedge and tree planting, creating wildlife corridors throughout the site via gardens, pedestrian routes, public open space and communal areas. Plot 1 is the northernmost plot. This contains a mix of dwelling types, including passive houses or passive house principles, the 3 at the entrance here. Earth sheltered scheme, which is the purple and green on the southernmost part of the field near the hedge, and a mixture of houses and maisonette flat properties. There's a pond and allotment area in the centre, which gives an open space area and an event at this curved nature here. There are green routes, which are the footpaths which dissect the site throughout and connect the different parcels and join into the public footpath, which is in this vicinity of the hedge at the moment, but it's looked to weave the footpath down along the edge of the open space and then back to join the public footpath on this eastern edge, thereby mitigating and maintaining this important ecological run along the hedge line where there are many protected species. The pink properties here on the other southern side are split level, and you'll see some details for those later. And then there is also space incorporated over here in the northeast, towards the northeast corner, and that link there is the potential link for the route to the railway station, which they are looking to try and progress moving forward into the future. Plot 2 is the central field in the middle here. This area is completely flats and maisonettes. They are 2.5-storey buildings with the half floor being rooms within the roof space. They are pairs of dwellings rather than terraces, but they are fanned in shape to reflect and follow the spine road and the footpaths in this area, with a very strong landscape setting in and around the buildings. There are car parking areas to the rear. There's areas of allotments. There's a communal area with a pond again here. All those areas are at slightly lower levels. The dwellings being set at the road level. That is something that they considered important. You may recall on the outline there was a concern that we may have a big embankment or a cutting through this central area. They've managed to overcome that by changing the gradient so that the houses reflect the road level, but then obviously they step out behind. or step down behind to the lower levels for the parking. Plot 3, as you can see, is predominantly detached houses, and like plot 1, they have been set to create a strong street frontage, so they're all fronting onto street lines to give a strong street emphasis, which is a feature around Battle. Public open space is located up in the northeast corner here, where the levels change, and then you will recall from site visits it's steeply sloping down into the woodland wetland valley in the central area. There's also an area of public open space with another pond to the southern extreme here, where the footpath connection goes through into Harold Terrace and Hastings Road, and then a square, an event area in this central area here at the T-junction. I have some illustrative views here for you. They do show the site in isolation, although this one does show the church building in the southeast corner of the picture here. This is the passive housings, the entrance coming in from Harrier Lane and looking up the site to the southern extreme at the back of Hastings Road at the north here, the central area in the middle. And this is an illustrative view looking the other way from plot 3 down to plot 1 at the bottom here, with the church, the building over on the right hand side here. This is an illustrative view of the earth sheltered housing, which you can see all fronts southwards, with communal areas in front of the 3 units, and the embankment that covers the rear of the properties being landscaped and going down to the Spine Road, which curves round the back of them. This is an example of the earth sheltered housing to give you an idea of the elevation and the internal layout. There are a number of elevations here. They've used same modular system, but with a palette of materials that reflect the local area, predominantly red brick or rendering to the ground floor, tile hanging or cladding to the first floor, and clay tiles to the roof. The exact materials are subject of a condition. The dwellings all exceed the space standards and seek to meet HQM, which is a quality mark for housing developments. And this is a split level properties. The HQM is a standard that they seek to obtain via sustainable construction, energy efficiency and water saving measures. The use of solar panels can be seen on most of the elevations here, which will be south facing, and they are particularly evident throughout the scheme. This is an example of the 2.5-storey property, with that the half-storey being the rooms within the roof space there. We then have some sections here. As can be seen in the sections, the properties, they seek to, as I said, follow the alignment of the road levels, but obviously there will be steps down through the site with properties stepping up and down the hillside. There's a couple more illustrative street scene views for you. This is one looking from the entrance off Harrier Lane, with the passive houses to the left side here and the woodland that backs onto Knights Gardens on the right hand side. This is a typical street scene through the central section. You've got the buildings fanning round the Spine Road here, with a strong emphasis on the planting around those developments. And this is a view from plot 3 coming in from the Spinney, with the strong street frontage wrapping round. The reserve matters as amended are now considered acceptable. A number of detailed matters remain the subject of outline conditions yet to be discharged, and a few additional conditions are recommended in the report. There is a full report before you. The recommendation is to grant the reserved matters as well as approving the landscape and ecological management plan which has been submitted, and this is in respect of condition 26. This has been approved by both the county ecologist and the county landscape officer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. That was a good presentation. I'm going to call upon the first speaker for the application. There are no speakers against this, and that would be Judy Ong. Judy, could you turn your camera and microphone on? Confirm that you can.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Thank you very much. And as I said, you'll have 5 minutes to speak, and then if members have questions, they will direct them to you. So whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you. Rother District Council has declared a climate emergency and is working towards developing a carbon neutral vision for 2030. Blackfriars offers a unique opportunity to drive this agenda forward. We're supportive of this vision, and sustainability has been at the heart of this project. With this in mind, our vision for Blackfriars is to develop a highly sustainable contemporary housing development that is future-proof for the transition to zero carbon, whilst respecting local heritage and landscape. All properties have been designed to be low energy, following the Fabric First principles. So they're designed with increased insulation standards so that homes feel warm and comfortable for the occupant, while reducing the energy consumption and the risk of fuel poverty. Moving away from fossil fuels for heating, air source heat pumps will be used, which are 3.5 times as efficient as a standard electric heater. The development is targeting a 31% reduction in carbon emissions above the current building regulations requirements and in line with the Future Homes standards. In addition, all the new homes will meet the BREEAM Home Quality Mark accreditation. This is a broad sustainability marker providing each occupant with a certificate rating in the 3 areas of our surroundings, my home and delivery, exceeding the typical design and performance standards. The HQM credits are awarded for ecological enhancement, private outdoor space, responsible sourcing of materials, water efficiency, low energy consumption, low and zero carbon technologies, air quality and electric vehicle charging points, which will be provided for every dwelling and 10% of communal spaces. We acknowledge that there will need to be changes to current building practices to take the final step to zero carbon emissions. And with that in mind, 4 of the properties have been designed to passive house principles. So the passive house standard developed in Germany delivers an extremely low energy building. It starts with orientation of the building, with the largest windows to the south to maximise the free energy from sunlight, and with external shading to reduce the overheating in summer. The building fabric is super insulated and airtight to minimise the heat loss and drafts, with mechanical ventilation to ensure good indoor air quality and to recover the heat from the extracted air. The result is a building that requires virtually no energy for heating, and the small amount of electricity for lighting and equipment can be delivered via PV panels. This development also includes 3 low-impact earth-sheltered dwellings, where the footprint of the building is completely green. Where a normal dwelling is exposed to cold winds which draw out the heat, building an earth-sheltered dwelling protects it from all but one side. The south-facing glazing captures the warmth from the sun and allows natural light and heat to penetrate through all of the living areas. The heat from the sun is absorbed by the thermal mass in the floors and walls of the dwelling, retaining the warmth and maintaining a consistent temperature throughout the year. The biophilic design, which enhances the connectivity to nature, has been continued throughout, with tree-lined streets, open communal areas that soften the lines and balance the structures and provide areas for nature to flourish. This scheme presents a real opportunity to set the standard for new housing within Rother District and to embed core principles into the team's design ethos. It will be resilient to future changes in climate and adopts a circular economy or cradle to cradle approach. It has considered low carbon design, prioritising a fabric first approach and being developed to incorporate nature, ecology and biophilic design. It has ensured that design solutions are cost effective and have added value. Finally, and most importantly, it has been designed in a way which will build a sense of community and social interaction, prioritising physical and mental health and the well-being of future residents. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Judy. That was really interesting and informative. Do we have any members that wish to ask a question of Judy? Councillor Prochak.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation and your presentation, Judy. Just a question. I mean, clearly, this is going to be the gold standard, and you've thought ahead in terms of the Environment Act. In terms of biodiversity, the ponds, the allotments, energy saving, water saving, everything. Just a quick question, because we've been involved, Rother's been involved with a project called Healthy Aging Through Innovation in rural Europe. And that first part of the project has come to an end, and Rother District Council are now discussing whether to become one of the 40 localities in the UK to adopt the age-friendly communities. And it was interesting that one of our last applications clearly was not age-friendly. They had huge steps up to the door, no easy parking in front of the houses. I just wondered how you have embedded those age-friendly elements into the scheme.
Thank you. Yes. Well, I think it starts with the buildings themselves. So we're trying to build very warm, comfortable, insulated, low energy buildings that are kind of cheap to run, if you see what I mean, low energy bills. But also, if you look at the design, there's footpaths throughout to take. It's a very sloping site, if you see what I mean. So if you look at the footpaths, which when you look on a plan view like they're all sloping, they're trying to make safe areas away from the roads where residents can walk through. We also have on-plot parking, and we have level access to try and make it easier and accessible for everybody. Hope that covers.
Thank you.
Your question.
Councillor Barnes. Mary Barnes.
Yeah, yes, thank you, Chairman. It's just such a marvellous concept. And there's a sort of Germanic thoroughness about it. Our daughter and son-in-law lived in accommodation in Germany, and it was absolutely superb, particularly in the winter. And in the summer, the house was cool, which was wonderful. But I'd just like to ask a question about people's living habits. First of all, will they be able to hang their washing out? And supposing they arrive with an absolute yearning to do a bit of gardening, is all that going to be taken care of somewhere on the plot, or are people going to be advised to conduct the whole of their laundry indoors?
Yeah, the drying spaces are actually part of the home quality mark, so we're receiving credits for providing drying spaces for all of the buildings, and also they will all have an outdoor space or a garden so that they've got access to that. There's also allotments on the plot, and there's links to all the walkways that we've seen. I mean, I think it's telling that with the coronavirus, the first thing people do when they've got spare time is spend it outdoors in nature, which is why we've tried to pull the nature into this design so much to try and encapsulate the biophilic side of it. So I think you'd find that there's quite a lot to draw people outside and to the opportunity to grow their own food. Even if they've got pots on a balcony, there is definitely food growing space, which is defined again within the home quality mark. So yes.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Councillor Tempe.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Hello, Judy. You mentioned air source pumps. Is that for every single dwelling?
Yes, it is.
Okay, and are they going to be on the outside of the building, like some we've seen? Or inside?
I think we'll try and, obviously they need, the air source heat pumps need to be on the outside of the building to allow heat flow past it. But what we've done is we've tried to incorporate it in such a way that the planting and things, and well, most of them will be to the rear of the building. They shouldn't be obvious. They should be hidden. They're not part of the frontage. They won't be seen at all from the road. That's what I was. So it's just trying to keep them hidden. But the idea is, I mean, obviously it's a more expensive option for the people, the developer, but it's that move away from fossil fuels. And with the PV panels on the roof as well, we're looking at much more sustainable development.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, they're going to be unobtrusive and possibly hidden by foliage. Is that correct? Yes. There is a noise issue, isn't there, with air source pumps?
Not the modern ones so much now that you have.
Oh, well, that's good. Okay, thank you.
If you're thinking of an office, you have the air source heat pumps, but you tend to have ventilation as well. So it's often the fans and the ventilation that you can hear. Part of the passive house standard is that the mechanical ventilation that you have in the passive houses as well has to be very, very quiet to meet the standards. So that shouldn't be a problem.
Thank you. Councillor Errington.
Thank you.
Hello, Judy. I don't know if this one is for you, but my question is regarding who pays for the maintenance of the green areas and the allotments and the open spaces?
I think that might be a question for one of my colleagues following this. Yes, sorry, I couldn't tell you that.
We'll hold that over. Well, thank you very much, Judy. That was very useful answers to those questions. So I'll say thank you very much. And if you could turn your microphone and camera off, and I'll invite Neil Thompson to speak, who is the agent. Neil, are you with us?
I am. Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, councillors. Thank you for the opportunity to address the Planning Committee this morning. As Sarah mentioned, outline planning permission has already been granted for the site for up to 220 dwellings, following the approval at Planning Committee in December. The Central Spine Road was also approved in detail as part of this outline permission, and therefore the principal development for housing on the site has already been approved. As outlined by Sarah, the scheme before you today seeks the approval for reserved matters, including issues relating to layout, scale, appearance. It's presented following an extensive design process and positive collaboration with the planning department, statutory consultees and local stakeholders, and we fully endorse the recommendation to approve the reserved matters. As members will be aware, the site has been identified for development for a number of years and was allocated to provide at least 220 dwellings under policy BT2 of the Rother local plan. There have been numerous past attempts to bring forward the development on the site over the past 20 years, all of which have been unsuccessfully, principally due to the site constraints, including complex ground conditions, the steep topography of the site, which limits the development area, land assembly, and the need for costly road infrastructure in the form of the Spine Road. To deliver the site, the council has received HIFT funding, which has brought forward the proposal. The HIFT grant offer of £8.7 million was accepted by Cabinet in January 2020. The proposal will make a significant contribution to economic, social and environmental well-being of the area and deliver very significant public benefits, including 200 highly sustainable, high-quality new homes with a range of tenure and sizes. The district's most recent housing land supply figure at the 1st of April 2020 equates to 2.87 years, and therefore the proposal will contribute considerably to the existing housing need for the district and Battle itself. In terms of affordable housing need, there are currently 357 households with a local connection to Battle on the council's housing register. With only 15 affordable Hanic units being delivered from 2011 to 2020 in Battle, the proposal to deliver 35% affordable housing, the range of tenures and sizes, represents a significant public benefit to the proposals. As well as providing the aforementioned housing delivery, further public benefits of the development will generate circa 620 jobs during the construction phase of the development, including at least 6 apprentices, graduates or trainees. An employment and skills plan is now in place as a requirement of the planning agreement that underpins the Outline Planning Permission. Finally, and as mentioned by Sarah, the proposal will deliver ecological mitigation and biodiversity compensation and improvements, as well as habitat improvement and enhancement to adjacent areas of ancient woodland, which was secured as part of the Outline Permission. Overall, the Reserve Matters proposal provides much needed market and affordable housing for the district and Battle, as well as a wide range of public benefits, and we fully support the officer's recommendation to grant approval. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Neil Thompson? No. Well, thank you very much, Neil. That was a useful presentation. Never be offended by the lack of questions. It just means you've provided everything everyone wanted to hear. So now we have Jonathan Thorns, who is the project architect. If I could ask Jonathan to turn on his camera and microphone.
Good morning. I hope you can all hear me. Good morning. Redesign were appointed. Oh.
Yes, go on, please.
Redesign were appointed by the applicant to provide and deliver collaborative architectural and sustainability services for the detailed design of 200 dwellings within the western parcel of the Blackfriars site secured by the outline application. Along with local and national requirements, Redesign's approach to design embeds 7 core principles from the outset: climate resilience, circular economy, well-being, community, low carbon, biophilic design, and value and cost. With this in mind, we aim to create a distinct sense of place that draws materiality and character for the local area, at the same time meeting the challenges of a highly sustainable and connected community as we begin the transition to zero carbon. It was essential to produce a residential master plan that harmonises our sustainable forward-thinking development vision with the local vernacular, taking cues from the Battle Neighbourhood Plan Design Guidelines and the High Wheel Design Guide. Using biophilic design to create organic community open space will result in greater well-being for residents and community engagement, while promoting biodiversity and ecology. Extensive ecological assessment of the site and the potential impacts of development have been carried out. The designs have been developed to avoid impact where possible, and any potential impacts will be mitigated through an ongoing programme of ecological work, which will improve biodiversity and habitat on site and in the adjacent woodland. The development itself will deliver managed areas of open space designed to be ecologically sensitive through the use of native plant species, good horticultural practice, and maintaining connectivity. In addition, ecological lighting strategies will also be produced for the Spine Road and housing development. The key to unlocking this challenging site has been the collaboration between all disciplines and focusing positively on the constraints, thus creating opportunities. The key technical solutions for important issues such as drainage, levels, retaining, and road infrastructure have all helped form the master plan. Alongside these technical solutions, the opportunities of the site, including sustainability, landscaping, and the surrounding heritage context, have also formed design cues. Emphasis is to be placed on the 3-dimensional design collaboration with GTA Civils, which has allowed for creativity within challenging topography. This has also helped realise the direction of the scheme with the use of visualisations which are backed up by a thought-out technical platform. Being able to assess the complex topography in a 3-dimensional environment has led to key design decisions surrounding thermal mass earth-sheltered properties, the orientation of passive house gateway plots, and using drainage strategy solutions as attractive ponds within community green space located in the 3 distinct development parcels. Took direct inspiration from the High Wheel Design Guide, which included the following: permeability, linking to existing connections and drawing inspiration from the twitterns within Battle; urban blocks, built form defining the street patterns, which has resulted in strong street frontages; materiality, proposals follow the notion of reinterpreting local details, clear horizontal banding using traditional materials to align with the distinct characteristics of Battle. The success of this flagship development will be its defining qualities: a rich green landscape setting with distinctive pedestrian routes set within high quality, community focused landscaping, a mix of 1 and 2 bed maisonettes with their own front doors, and 2, 3 and 4 bed houses will be provided, and all within their own private outdoor space in addition to the community garden space. Our proposal encapsulates a positive approach to all aspects of sustainable design and, most importantly, is community driven. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. We have a question from Councillor Mary Barnes.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to ask you, an absolutely fascinating project, but I'd just like to ask you, will you and your firm be on site during the duration of the building of this and to make absolutely sure that your plans, your innovative ideas are carried out fully and not left to anyone else. The second question I'd just like to ask you a little bit about, and you haven't mentioned it, so I don't know whether I'll be ruled out, but there was some concern about courtyard parking. And whether that was going to work terribly well. I believe there might be some changes to that, but I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about that as well.
Thank you, Councillor. First question is we hope we will be involved. Those discussions are currently ongoing, which is great. We're in a really positive place. The second question about communal parking, there was a lot of discussions, design developments with the planners and obviously all disciplines, and we've tried to get on-plot parking where possible. We have got community parking available for highly constrained areas of the site. Lighting strategies will be provided. Parking is overlooked where possible to provide natural surveillance. Again, all as a result of the discussions and development with the local planning authority.
I realise it's a difficult thing to actually look after every single car on the site, but I believe it is of some concern to the police. That owners may not necessarily be able to just look out and see their own car, and it would be reassuring to know that that is, well in hand.
All right, thank you, Councillor Stevens.
Yes, good morning. Mine's regarding the planting you're doing. Would it be possible to have some wildflower planting on verges? It's very good for the environment and it looks lovely as you enter the sites. Thank you.
Jonathan, that's a question to you.
Yeah, we'll certainly look to develop the landscaping proposals. We do have pockets of wildflowers already in the landscape strategy and landscape grass verges areas in plot 3. Certainly, as you enter the site is kind of the feel of an avenue. So yeah, we do have landscapes and roadside planting, and yeah, we'll take that wildflower idea and look to develop it.
Thank you very much. I mean, it does look beautiful as well, so it's not only good for the environment but really looks nice as well. Thank you very much.
Well, I have to say, Councillor Stevens, that the pictures looked like they had wildflowers in them. So let's hope that the actual delivers that. It's not really a complicated thing to do. So we can follow up. Councillor Prochak.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Jonathan, I can't imagine how you must have felt when you were chosen to do this site, because it will attract, I think it will attract national interest with what you're doing here. I didn't ever expect I would hear a planner talk about the circular economy. Wonderful. I just wanted to say that. Is it possible to have a copy of your presentation at all, or is that not done?
All the information that we've produced is readily available. The majority of my presentation materials throughout this process has been embedded into the design and access statement, which is obviously in the public domain. So yeah, if you do need anything further, by all means, we can sort that out.
Oh, thank you, Jonathan. I think the answer to the question, Councillor Prochak, it's now in the public domain because he's read it out. So I'm sure that he'd be more than happy to give it in hard copy, as that would just save a step. So thank you very much, Jonathan. That was very good. Are you confident that this project will be delivered without a viability assessment appearing at a later date? It is a complicated site. What is your feeling on that? Because as a planning committee, we see this more regularly than we would like to, where we get a lovely plan and then a follow-up which is compromised.
It's been in the main design cues from the start, which it has been sustainably driven scheme. It's the heart of our concept, the heart of the scheme. So yes, we will be taking that forward. And yeah, we've been reassured that it's going to remain a main focus throughout up to completion.
Good, because that's what we want. We want deliverability of what we see. So thank you very much for that. I don't have any other questions for you, so thank you very much. All three speakers are welcome to stay in the meeting to the end of the application, through to the end of the vote, and then you can exit at that point. And if you want to watch other applications, please do on YouTube. I think we have the ward member. If I could ask you to turn your audio and video off, Jonathan, thank you. I think we now have the ward member, Kevin Dixon. Kevin, are you with us?
Indeed, I am, Chairman. Thank you.
Floor is yours.
Thank you. One point I'd like to bring up before we start, which has been mentioned by a number of people who have written into this application, is that Rother owns the land that we are developing. Rother is the development company, and now Rother is giving itself planning permission today, which doesn't seem to be an open and transparent democratic process. I know that is the process, but I think it's something that maybe we should look at in the future, is that it's all pretty all much in-house. Whether we can get other authorities to determine our own applications may be a better form of transparency, and that's been brought up by a number of local residents. And I think it's got to be noted by myself, the ward member, that this isn't a development that is universally welcomed in Battle. The neighbours have been campaigning against this for a while and are still campaigning against it. And I think we need to manage the construction work so very, very carefully as to not upset and disrupt more than is necessary the local population, because there's a lot of people who have been living next to this site as countryside for many, many years, and it's going to be a bit of a shock for them. However, having said all that, I personally welcome the innovative approach to the whole scheme. It will be something that we've never done before. It will be an example to the rest of the district and other authorities locally, and I do hope it's something that we can be very, very proud of. And I do hope also that the local population will come to like it and appreciate what we are doing and what we are going to achieve on Blackfriars once it's done. And I think in 2 years' time or so, when hopefully this is all done or mainly done, we're actually going to look at that and say we've done a very, very good job. We need the houses in Battle. There's absolutely no doubt on that. It's just, of course, where they are, and people who have them at the end of their garden don't necessarily want them. So that's just what I need to say on behalf of the residents that live around there. But apart from that, I welcome the report. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dixon. I don't believe your other ward members are planning to speak on this application, but I will just double check. Councillor Cook and Councillor Field.
Yes, please. I would like to speak.
Oh, both. Hang on. Well, I think we've got both of you. So I will ask Councillor Cook first, as she was in the box, and then Councillor Field. So Councillor Cook.
Thank you very much indeed. I just want to say that as a resident of Battle for almost 44 years, I applaud Rother for bringing this exciting project forward, and especially pleased to note the 70 affordable homes. I'm always saddened at our young families who've grown up, gone to Battle and Langton Primary School, Claverham Community College, and then caught the school bus to Bexhill College, and who've contributed so much to the life of our town, and would dearly love their own children to have the same basis and enjoy the same community spirit that they did, are having to leave their hometown because they cannot afford to rent or buy property near their families, whose support they need now more than ever. But I wonder if we could add some local conditions to this development to protect our residents, as Councillor Dixon has just alluded to protect our residents from inconvenience and stress when work begins on the site, by perhaps asking contractors to use main routes and delivery times of perhaps between 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock, thus enabling workers, commuters and those on the ubiquitous school run to move freely around the town without the delays caused by pantechnicons blocking their route. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cook. And Councillor Field.
Yes, thank you. I've got a series of questions prompted by the report, but first of all, I'm afraid the pedant in me is bound to comment that Blackfriars abuts Knight's Meadow, not Knight Garden. Sorry, I just had to say that. I think, as Kevin and Vicky have really alluded to, most people in Battle would really rather see this plot, this space, maintained as open fields and for nature and for walking around. Having said that, it has been identified for housing for decades, and we do understand that this is going to happen. So I think the role of us has always been to make the best of a bad job, and I think we have done that. But I do have questions which arise out of the report, and if I can just go through them. 1.1 says the details for the layout, appearance, landscaping and scale of the majority of the development, and I'm wondering why only the majority. 3.4 talks about excessive cutting and embankments, and I'm wondering what excessive means, because it is, after all, in the eye of the beholder, isn't it? 5.1 refers to previous policy, which I think is still extant, and in that it mentions the single form entry primary school, which we know, because we've had it from Children's Services on countless occasions, is not needed and will not be happening. So if that is a quotation from a previous policy, I think it needs some explanation for public record. And if it isn't a quotation, I think it needs removing, because it is not required. Councillor Barnes referred to highways concerns about parking, and the report doesn't seem to address those. It also doesn't really talk about the planting scale and the size of trees and visibility displays. And we know from the highway network that if highways is not happy with the visibility displays, they will just come and mow them down. So I think that needs addressing at the planning stage. 6.18 talks about access to the railway, and I do recognise there are difficulties with this, but I do hope 6.18 isn't diluting our aim to have downside access to the railway for the station. Finally, or actually no, not finally, penultimately, the objections are dealt with in this report in an interesting way, because those which are deemed important are addressed fully, and those which are deemed not important are addressed less fully. But I would observe that to an objector, all objections, if they're theirs, are important, and I think they deserve equal courtesy. And my last question is about flooding. There's a lot of concern at Harrier Lane and Knight's Meadow and the Emmanuel Centre, which is the religious building referred to, about flooding. It's happened before when there's been heavy rain down that site, and I think, and I know there are SUDS plans and everything, there's a degree of reluctance to accept that this actually is not going to be a problem, because experience in the past has been wet gardens and wet houses and wet feet. So I think perhaps I'd like some reassurance on that point. But finally, I would say that 3.1 talks about not all the sites being developed and left to nature, which is absolutely excellent. I'm delighted that the 3.5% of affordable housing won't be negotiated away by an alleged viability statement. And I think the environmental standards being used in this building project are admirable, and hopefully will be the gold standard. No, perhaps actually the bronze standard, because we'd hope to build on it in future and make it even better. And we need to be able to say to developers, look, this has been done now, 10 years on, you can do better than this. So yes, sad to see the housing on this lovely open space, but recognise that what is planned is for the best. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine Field. And just before we go for discussion, I would like to reassure Councillor Dixon that there is a clear division between Rother District Council and the Planning Authority and Committee, as I said at the beginning. And whilst people might be concerned about that, if it does anything, it means that the applicant as Rother is going to take a lot more care because they have to stand to a far higher standard than might otherwise be presented to us. and I know that there's been enormous pressure on them to deliver that to this committee, which makes an independent judgment against policy. So let all those who might think that isn't the case understand that that is the case. If there was anything wrong with this application, it will be picked up by this committee and dealt with accordingly. So on that basis, I'm going to ask if anyone wants to make any comments or ask the officers any questions. The officers might want to pick up some of the points that Catherine Field made. So I will ask the officers first. Sarah Shepherd, if she wanted to address any of those concerns raised.
Yes, Chairman, thank you. Yes, can I just draw members' attention to paragraph 8.21 of the report? That clearly sets out this issue raised by Councillor Dixon and some of the objectors regarding conflict of interest. It refers to Regulation 3 of the Town and Country Planning General Regulations and clarifies for you that there is no conflict of interest in the council dealing with this application today as planning committee. Those officers dealing with it today are totally separate from the applicants. So there is no conflict of interest there. To go back to Councillor Field's comments, there is a reference to the majority of the development because, as I said in my presentation, there is the northeast corner of the site, the blue hatched area, which is not part of this reserve matters. So there would be a further application in the future for the reserve matters of that element, which encompasses the extra 20 dwellings. OK, the excessive cuttings reference, that was referenced the initial concerns we had at the outline stage when we were given the details of the Spine Road, and there were some concerns at that time that we were going to have a big deep cutting, particularly through that central field area. As the agents have said in their discussions, they've worked closely with engineers on this who've had 3D modelling. They've got a special computer program that models throughout the whole site. It's got existing and proposed levels, and they've managed to get rid of that cutting and to provide level access to the houses as discussed by them. So that clarifies that. The primary school reference, yes, you're quite right, that is referenced in the original policy. But the County Council have maintained that that is not now required, so hence that is not part of the scheme, but it is a policy reference, so it's just a quote from the policy. Parking, we have done a lot of work on the parking layout with the applicants. We've sought now, as they said, to provide a lot of on-plot parking. There are some areas of parking courtyards, and you will see that there is a condition to finalise the details of those areas. There is an odd comment from Highways, a concern on one of them about manoeuvrability, but they have already looked at that and they are able to satisfy that. Visibility displays, yes, that is something that they will have to address in looking at the final details for planting. There is a landscape strategy which outlines the views for the tree street scene with trees in the street and around the site. Obviously planting, yes, we know that planting does need to be no more than 600 high above the carriageway, so that is something that will have to be taken forward in those details coming forward for further conditions. Access to the railway, yeah, that is on there, so as you say, that is something for the future and that is still being looked at. Objections, we do try to give equal weight to all objections. I'm sorry if you don't feel that that's the case, but that is the intention. Flooding, yes, there's been a lot of discussion on this. You'll have noticed the comments from the lead local flood authority. They're looking at values based on the worst case scenario to ensure that there isn't a risk of off-site flooding from the development. The idea with flooding measures nowadays is that any surface water, particularly, obviously foul water goes into the foul drainage system. The surface water system is based on using holding tanks and ponds and things and controlling the rate of release of that water into the surrounding streams, ditches, you know, wherever it's going off to. So controlling that rate of release should preclude any flooding issues. Obviously, they can only control the rate of release on this site itself. They can't control surface water on other surrounding areas. Whether that has any impacts, you know, that's for others to resolve. But the intention is, and the lead local flood authority are satisfied that the flood measures being proposed here should avoid any flooding off-site once the development is completed. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. If we can move on to any discussion or questions to the officers after all those presentations. Do I have firstly Councillor Meir. Oh, sorry, I have Councillor Errington. My apologies.
Hi, thank you. So just to clarify with Sarah, please, at the moment, the only access out of the site to access the station is the one onto Hastings Road.
Sure.
No, I mean, you can also go out through Harrier Lane, round, Knights Meadow, and the footpath link that joins the footpath to the station that direction. Yeah.
So what ideally we'd have, but I kind of got my map upside down, but if we were to have a footpath, this would be going through the open area, wouldn't it? It wouldn't be going through the housing estate because that's not going to be against the railway. It's the open area is against the railway. The
potential footpath link would be up the steep bank to the railway, and obviously that's third-party land and subject to Network Rail.
Right. Okay. My second question is about the maintenance of the green areas, the flowers, the trees, etc., etc. Who would be responsible for paying for that?
Right, that is contained within the Section 106 agreement. There is a requirement to have, and I know the applicants and developers are looking at that. There would be a maintenance company that would be responsible for all the communal areas. Obviously, there's going to be upkeep for the ecological side of things and the surface water drainage scheme as well. So all that is being looked at by a management company.
So this is what we're seeing. I'm seeing locally, in that residents on an estate near to me weren't going to ask for another bin. They did their own litter pick because they knew that more bins would mean a higher maintenance fee. I'm kind of concerned that this could be quite expensive, although I appreciate that might be able to be offset against some of the utility bills, which are going to be lower, but people are going to have obviously mortgage, rent, council tax, and then a maintenance fee, as you would perhaps with a flat, but this is obviously going to be housing as well.
Yeah, I don't know all the exact details because we haven't had that submission. That would have to come in as part of, as I say, part of the Section 106 agreement. But the intention is that there will be a management company that will be responsible for all the communal areas. Yeah.
Right. Thank you very much.
Councillor Meir.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I thank all the people who have put this together and given the presentations this morning, and I have very great confidence in all parties who have contributed, and I really look forward to this going ahead. My one concern is this, that so much of the final appearance of the scheme is subject to conditions, subject to proposals being put forward and agreed with officers. All the facings and materials and so on of the development, the appearance, and we've heard about verges and planting and so on, to be agreed. And we don't have we do have some idea from the illustrations of how this will look eventually when it's finished, but we don't know for sure. And taking on board what has been said about transparency and the fact that this is our own Rother's application, and the strong local interest and the importance of it, I wonder whether these matters ought to come back to the committee at when officers have agreed the materials and so forth, whether it should come back to the committee for this committee to have the final say on it. I don't know if officers, if there is a procedure for that to be done, whether officers could help on that.
Do you want to comment, Sarah, or did Sam want to?
I mean, Sam may want to comment, but I would say that that is entirely unusual. You know, it's not just the officers that comment on the details for materials and planting and things. We consult statutory consultees on those details, like the county ecologist, the county landscape officer, our tree advisor. Obviously, materials is something that we deal with day in, day out. Our own conservation design officer was particularly involved in the High Weald Housing Design Guide, and she is very much involved in materials and discussions with the High Weald unit on materials. It's something that we're quite used to dealing with. So, you know, we have that added thing that if you want things brought back to committee, that does add time delays on. And sometimes when we're faced with grant timelines and things, it's, you know, can affect that side of things as well for people. So
I think what I would I think what I would recommend, Andrew, is that as this, you know, subject to the decision on this application, that it's fairly easy just to talk to officers to see those things as they go through in an informal way. If there was anything that was very concerning, to raise those issues, and they would be dealt with by the officers. I think that would be the normal process. Are you happy with that?
As I say, I have great confidence and been very, very reassured by Sarah Shepherd and what she said. I think it needed to be said because I know members of the public are watching this, and I know there's been criticism of the entirely normal and entirely proper fact that Rother is dealing with its own application, or this committee is dealing with Rother's application, and I think the public need to be absolutely reassured that these things are properly dealt with.
I think, and I appreciate your comments, and I think it's right that you made those comments. I think that Rother District Council is probably more concerned and alert to the need to ensure that the materials are as described. So I think we have that reassurance, but also, as I said, if you, as it goes through the process, you're more than welcome to have those, you know, informal discussions with officers, and if you saw anything that you felt was wrong, to flag them up and deal with them appropriately. So thank you. Councillor Coleman.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, the term gold standard's been used a lot, and hopefully one day this might be just the standard. But I think this is, you know, absolutely a really positive way to build houses, and especially on the quantity that this is. I'm really glad about these sort of environmental considerations that have been made. My one thing is, obviously, I'd like to see a higher percentage of social housing, a higher percentage of affordable housing. But I appreciate that we have to deal with sort of your friend and mine viability. My only question might be to Sarah, I guess. If there was a situation where the applicant found there was perhaps the potential to increase the percentage of affordable housing, for whatever reason, something was cheaper than was expected, and there was enough sort of money in the budget for it to still be viable if there was a higher percentage of affordable housing, would that be a possibility, or is this percentage a fixed percentage?
Sarah.
Yeah, so the policy criteria sets the minimum amount for affordable housing that we seek to get. As you say, quite often there are viability issues that take things out of our hands and that we can't necessarily then control. But there is nothing in terms of policy, and we don't have any other controls to preclude more social housing being provided than specified in policy. So, you know, there's nothing to stop a developer after they've completed a development selling off additional properties to a social landlord. That is outside of our remit to control that.
Thank you.
Councillor Prochak.
Thank Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to underline what you said about conflicts of interest. The Planning Committee is quite a different animal from any other committee on Rother District Council. First of all, the public watching will have noticed that any councillor who has got any involvement with our housing company has actually withdrawn from the meeting and cannot vote and cannot speak. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we all leave our political hats off when we're on the planning committee. So it is quite different from any other decision-making committee on Rother. So I just wanted to point that out to add some reassurance to the impartiality of this committee. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Well, we've had some good presentations and some questions to clarify issues on officers. I don't have anyone else who's indicated they want to speak. Did somebody want to make a proposal in relation to this application?
I'm happy to. Chair.
I have got Councillor Prochak who's proposing. And what are you proposing, Councillor Prochak?
For the recommendation. Approval.
Approval of the officer's recommendation. Do I have anyone who would like to second that proposal?
Second, Councillor Harmer.
Seconded by Councillor Harmer. On which basis I'm going to ask our clerk, Julie, to take a vote. Julie, if I could hand that to you.
Chairman, I'm just going to clarify that Councillor John Barnes is not going to be voting on this application.
Correct.
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 I will call your names out in alphabetical order if you can say for, against or abstain. So it's Councillor Mrs Barnes. For. Councillor Coleman.
For.
Councillor Errington.
For.
Councillor Ganley.
For.
Councillor Harmer.
For.
Councillor Johnson.
For.
Councillor Madeley.
For.
Councillor Mear.
For.
Councillor Norton.
For.
Councillor Prochak.
For.
Councillor Stevens.
For.
Councillor Tempe.
For.
And Councillor Vinehall.
For.
That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you very much. And again, thank you to the speakers if they would now like to leave the meeting. Thank you for that. And we're going straight on to the next application, which is 2020-565P, and that is number 11 Elderslie Lane and at Bexhill. So if I'm not sure which officer is presenting this, Sam Batchelor.
Thanks, Chairman. The Mark Cathcart will do this for us, but I'll be hosting the presentation. So bear with us for a second.
Are you there, Mark?
Yes, I'm here.
The floor is yours.
Just loading up the presentation, Chairman. Sorry, it's taken.
That's all right. That's absolutely fine. Everything has a slight delay, which adds up over time. Yes, we can see that.
Great.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, councillors. This is an application for 26 dwellings, of which 8 would be affordable houses. The site is located within the development boundary of Bexhill and is an allocated housing site in the DASA local plan under policy BEX 8. Planning Committee previously resolved to grant outline planning permission for 24 dwellings on this site under an earlier application subject to a Section 106 agreement. The latter was never progressed, however, and that application remains undetermined. This is an alternative scheme. The site is about 1¼ hectares in total. It contains a detached, the land contains a detached dwelling, Mullins Mead, which is excluded from the application site. As well as its immediate garden. Site is bounded on the eastern side by Ellerslie Lane. The access to Mullins Mead is off Ellerslie Lane, and that would be retained. To the south, there are properties in Friarts Way, and the western boundary of the site fronts onto Friarts Way, the frontage there. There are a number of trees on this site which are covered by a TP or tree protection order. These essentially run along the side of Ellerslie Lane there, and also east-west across the site, where there's a bank which separates the upper site from a lower paddock here. There's also a badger set on the site, which is an annex to a main set, which is located off-site, and that's in about that area there. The application proposal that includes an ecological impact assessment, which proposes a badger mitigation strategy to address that, and it will and that will need to be done under a licence from Natural England. There are application proposal. It proposes 2 accesses into the development site, and they would be from Friarts Way on the western side. So that's one there and one there. To the north of the site, there is an existing detached property called Welton. Moving on to the next. Here we have the typical house types. This shows one of the detached dwellings. The house types vary more or less across the sites. A few are duplicated, some are handed. This is one of the detached properties. In terms of materials and to an extent the design, this is attempted to reflect the design of Mullins Mead itself. This is another one of the detached examples. That's an elevation that will be fronting onto Friarts Way. This shows a typical example of a pair of semi-detached houses on the site. This example here shows 3 units. These are 3 of the affordable units. One unit down the side there is a house, and this side here, the ground floor is a flat, and above that is a flat. The ground floor is a wheelchair accessible unit. And this example is of one of the 2 proposed bungalows on the site, which will be located towards the cul-de-sac end of Friarts Way. And this is the proposed terrace on the site. It's one terrace, and that will be a terrace of 3 units. Here we have sections across the sites. There are sections across Friart's Way, and there are 4 sections here. That's at 1, 2, 3, 4. On the left-hand side, you've got the existing form of development, and on this side is the proposed form of development. So that represents the property, the existing property on the left side, Friart's Way, and that will be the new development. Here you have an aerial view, somewhat unclear, for which I apologise. The boundaries of this site are on the north there, and beyond that we've got the property Welton. We've got the TPO trees down that side, where we've got Ellerslie Lane. And there we've got Mollins Mead itself, which is excluded from the application site. And across here, running east-west, we've got the tree bank and the lower paddock there, beyond which we've got the lower bungalows and chalet bungalows in Friart's Way, and the southern boundary of the site runs along their rear gardens, and flanking this side of the site we've got Friart's Way. The sections that you've just seen run across there. There are 4 of them. Here we've got a street scene just showing the Friart's Way. These are the properties on the southern side of the site, with the rear gardens flanking onto the application site. This shows the upper end of Friart's Way, the cul-de-sac on the topmost part. This is looking down in the opposite direction, down Friart's Way. So we've got the existing properties on this side and the application site on the other side, behind what is presently a close-boarded fence. And here we have, this is part of Ellerslie Lane. It's a different character. It's much more heavily treed. That is the edge of the application site there. Sorry, could I go back, please? So, thank you. And the entrance to Mollins Mead is about there at that point. The recommendation is, as the report, to delegate authority to grant planning permission, full planning permission, subject to conditions and the completion of a Section 106 agreement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. And just early on, there is one speaker for this, and that is Mr. Barry Welsh, who joined the meeting. Barry, are you with us, and could you turn your camera on? Do we have Mr. Welsh?
Yes, can you see me now?
We can see you now. So just as you came in a little bit late, the presentation had only just started. I'm going to ask you to speak. You've got 5 minutes to speak. If the members have questions, I'll ask those, after which time I'll ask you to turn your microphone off and camera as well, and stay for the application to the end of the vote, at which time you need to leave the meeting. So hopefully that's all right. And just take your time. You have 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. I live in Ellerslie Lane, in the property described as Welton in the application, situated on the northern boundary of the site, and I'm a committee member of the Ellerslie Area Residents Association. It is accepted the site will be developed, but it should be in character with the surrounding properties. There have been many objections to this application, but I would like to focus on 3 issues. Firstly, with regard to density and design. Although the proposal for 26 dwellings is only 2 above the approved outline application, there has been a significant increase of 13% in the number of bedrooms provided by this proposal. There is an increase from 70 in the outline plan to 79 in this application. This is due to the extra houses and a number of 3-bedroom units being enlarged into 4-bedroom units. The consequence of more houses and bigger houses is a reduction in external space. This has resulted in side-by-side parking envisaged in the outline plan being replaced by tandem parking for the majority of houses. In the real world, this style of parking is often underutilised. It will result in pavement parking in Friart's Way with consequent hazard to pedestrians, in particular the partially sighted and disabled. The NPPF paragraphs 122 and 131 requires decisions to support developments that maintain an area's prevailing character and setting, and that fits in with the form and layout of their surroundings. Friart's Way comprises a spacious layout of detached chalet bungalows, and this application is cramped and out of character. The semi-detached houses on plots 910 and 2122 have high, steeply pitched roofs with gable ends and give an overbearing presence, which is particularly noticeable to the bungalows opposite in Friart's Way and property Welton. I do not believe the application complies with the NPPF. Secondly, with regard to carbon neutrality, Rother's policy SRN1 requires proposed developments of more than 10 dwellings to provide a comprehensive energy strategy. I assume this would address the method of heating and vehicle charging. I couldn't see that a strategy had been provided. The government plans ending the sale of new petrol and diesel cars by 2030. Households will require access to charging points. Policy TR3 requires the provision of an electric vehicles charging infrastructure. This will be difficult to provide where forecourt parking is proposed, such as on plots 4 to 6 and 17 to 19. Thirdly, due to the cramped nature of the proposal, there are now 5 dwellings exiting their driveways onto the road at the end of Friart's Way. That is plots 24, 25, 26, and the existing bungalows at 31 and 33 Friart's Way. Within a matter of yards, there is also the exit from the development and another 12 dwellings. I believe this is unsafe, creating a high risk of conflict and discord between the residents of these properties. It would not be in compliance with OSS 4.1 in meeting the needs of future occupiers, and OSS 4.2 in that it does not unreasonably harm the amenity of adjoining properties. For the reasons given, I ask that the committee refuse its application. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Welch. And I'm going to ask if there are any members that would like to ask questions of Mr. Welch. Are there any? I don't have any. That doesn't mean that you haven't given a good presentation. It just means that you've been very succinct in what you wanted to say. So thank you very much for that. And as I said, please stay in the meeting till after the vote. I do have Councillor Richard Thomas, who I believe wants to speak on as ward member. Councillor Thomas, are you with us?
Hello there. Chair, members of the committee. I'm speaking as the ward member in relation to this application. I discovered that the residents of Friart's Way are very, very unhappy with the application, and I intend simply to firstly just say that I'm aware of these considerations and just want to reinforce them. There is a concern about overlooking. There's a concern that the houses are excessively high. There's a concern over the road access. There's a concern over the ecological side. But what I would like to do, and by the way, Chair, I want to say now, I should have, and I would like now to declare an interest as the Rother representative on the Pevensey and Cuckmere Water Levels Management Board, because that's relevant to the point that I now wish to take up. It's a point which I feel has not been covered properly in the report that you've been given. I was very surprised to discover when I checked the DASA yesterday in connection with this planning application, to find that the DASA starts with the following statement. The site is located within the Pevensey Levels hydrological catchment, with implications for sustainable drainage as set out in the environmental chapter of this local plan. Nowhere in the documents given to the committee is there any reference to the fact that it is within the Pevensey Levels hydrological catchment area and to the implications of that. In the DASA, it therefore goes on to say, in accordance with the Habitats Regulations assessment, work undertaken to inform the core strategy and DASA, a minimum of 2 types and stages of sustainable drainage treatment will be required. Members of the committee might have been surprised by the inclusion of these 2 types of sustainable drainage and might have wondered why. And the answer is because it is necessary to obviate any adverse effects on the Pevensey Levels, as is made clear later on. It goes on to say it will be necessary for any planning application for the site's development to be accompanied by a site-specific appropriate assessment to ensure that the required flood mitigation can be achieved and any adverse impact on the Pevensey Levels can be avoided. Now, this fact about the need for an appropriate assessment is not contained, so far as I can see clearly, within the report at any time. And the DASA makes it very clear that this is not merely a sufficient, but an absolutely essential condition for any application to be considered. And yet this application has been considered, notwithstanding the lack of an appropriate assessment. It further seems to me that this issue is somewhat disguised in the information given to the planning committee. So, for example, at 8.2.3, it sets out that the development must meet a number of conditions, but without actually saying what these conditions are. Whereas, in fact, the principal condition is that there has to be an appropriate assessment. That is a fact, as I say, which is not highlighted in the report and which is very, very relevant to the consideration. Now, there appears to be a quotation from the appropriate policy that actually this is really, I think, quite a misleading quotation. Let me explain. If I'm 17 years old and I say to my parents, I have passed my cycling proficiency test and therefore I'm entitled to bring my bike to school, that is one statement. If I say, if in fact the reality is that the head teacher said to me, Richard, if you pass your cycling proficiency test, you will be entitled to take your bicycle to school, you will see that's a completely different statement. What you've actually got in the papers presented to you under the heading of 8.5.9 is simply a statement which makes it look as if an appropriate assessment has been carried out and has been passed. If you turn now to 8.5.9, you will see that it says, and it does say part of it, but it doesn't say what the part missed out says. Part of 8.5.9 states, in accordance with policy DEN5, sustainable drainage, at least 2 forms of appropriate SUDs are incorporated, and an appropriate assessment under the Habitats Regulation demonstrates beyond reasonable scientific doubt that these can be delivered on the site and that the development can proceed, etc., etc. But actually, if you look at what it says in the data, what it says is this. It says, I quote, proposals will be permitted where, and then it goes on to say in accordance, etc., etc. So whereas the information given to you made it look as if an appropriate assessment has been carried out and has been passed, when you actually look at the DASA, it isn't a statement to that effect at all. It's an essential condition for a proposal to be even considered. And so there's quite a gap between the impression created by the papers given to the planning committee and what has actually happened. Now, If you look further at 8.5.10, you will see that an appropriate assessment has been screened out on the basis of an opinion by Natural England that 2 forms of SUDS will not be required. And on that basis, a conclusion has been reached that an appropriate assessment will not be needed. Now, it seems to me it is not the job of Natural England to say whether or not an appropriate assessment will or will not be needed. It's the job of Natural England to give their advice on whether they think an appropriate assessment should be passed or not. And so what I would say here is, it seems to me that a number of the piece of information given to the Planning Committee taken together would suggest that a particular consideration need not be bothered about, whereas the DASA takes an extremely different point of view. And indeed, I noticed that there is a list of 20 relevant policies in connection with this particular site. And the only one which is not mentioned is EN5. In the DASA, EN5 is the only one.
If I could stop you at that point, Richard, we're sort of running well over time. I think we've got the idea, and what I'm going to do is to ask the officers to address that directly. So I'm sorry to cut you off. You're right over.
Thank you for this. No, thank you for listening. Thank you for letting me say it.
No, you're right, and this will be one of the key points I'm going to ask them to address straight away. So thank you for that. And I'm going to ask either Mark or Sam, whoever feels most inclined, to comment on 3 things. First, the person speaking against the application, Mr. Barry Welsh, brought up two elements. One of them was the energy strategy and the EV structure, and Councillor Thomas has brought up this issue of the appropriate assessment and the discrepancy between the report and the DASA. And if you could address all of those, I would be appreciative.
Should I, on the carbon neutral strategy within the DASA, that is a policy within the DASA now. But when this application was first submitted towards the end of 2019, the DASA had not been adopted, so that wouldn't have been a validation requirement with the application.
Okay.
Sorry, just to add to that as well, I think that the suggestion was that there should be a strategy because of the size of the development, but the policy in the core strategy superseded by the DASA policy and the threshold changed. So whereas you used to have to provide an energy strategy for schemes of 10 units or more if they're residential, it's now 100 units.
Okay.
Which this scheme doesn't achieve. Obviously, always good to try and get energy efficiency information, but not something that's required as part of this scheme.
That answers the question. And now this key question that Councillor Thomas raised about the appropriate assessment and the difference between what's in the DASA and what's in the report. Can you address that?
Well, I think this is in connection with the surface water drainage for the site, and in respect of that, both the lead local flood authority, which includes the Pevensey Levels Board, and also Natural England, were consulted on the application, and their comments are contained in the report. The drainage from the site is proposed to be an attenuated scheme, which would involve underground crates or reservoirs to form attenuation, and also an open swale or pond on that southern paddock that was indicated, and from there would be the drainage would be into the highway drain, and so in that regard, it would not affect the Pevensey Levels because it would be directed along with all the rest of the highway water into the sea.
So in short, Mark, if I get this correctly, you're essentially saying the water is going to go into the existing drains, which will bypass Pevensey Levels, and therefore an appropriate assessment isn't required because there's going to be nil effect. Is that correct?
That was, yes, and that was considered by Natural England. They said that they did not consider that a proposal of this nature and scale in this location would result in a likely significant effect on the Pevensey Levels special area of conservation. And it's on that basis that an appropriate assessment could be screened out.
All right, okay. So do I have anyone who'd like to make comments on this application or ask questions of the officers? Don't appear to have any at the moment. I don't have.
Probably I would.
I have Councillor Prochak. John, I have Councillor Prochak first. Sorry.
Okay.
Councillor Prochak. I have a few people before you. Councillor Prochak.
Thank you, Chair. Could I just raise another thing? And is that obviously there's ecological issues on this site, huge ecological issues in terms of loss of trees, in terms of, well, badgers and grass snakes and bats and newts and all sorts of things. And paragraph 813 does really address these particular issues. But I wanted to ask Sam, because the NPPF, okay, we haven't got the new biodiversity net gain legal requirements in terms of the Environment Act, but NPPF does say, paragraph 175, does say that we should secure measurable net gains for biodiversity. We should secure measurable net gains. And in our own core strategy, we do talk about biodiversity and green space, and it says that it should be protected and enhanced. And so developers are expected to consider and promote opportunities for the creation or restoration of habitats. Now, I know there's going to be a new pond, and I know there's going to be a belt of land that's left to be wild, if you like, which we hope all these species will migrate to this little bit of land, and so they'll be all right. They have got to, by law, deal with the badger sets, and by law deal with the bats, and by law deal with any newts. And they say that the pond has been is not suitable, but newts don't just live in ponds. They actually do live on sites outside ponds. And if it's great crested newts, then that's a bigger issue, because we are probably the only area in Europe that contains great crested newts. So I just wanted to ask Sam: does he feel that enough has been done to not only to deal with the existing biodiversity and wildlife, but to actually enhance and give a net gain? That was my big question. Thank you.
Chairman, can I go?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I mean, to address you straightforwardly, yes is the short answer. We do think enough has been done. We've asked the applicant, as part of our usual process, to provide information. In this instance, I think we've got at least 2 or 3 reports, and Mark can provide more detail on that if necessary, including one that's part of a recommended condition in this instance, which secures a number of mitigation and compensation measures as set out in the report. So just to expand on it a little more, yes, we obviously are in a period of transition where in the future it may well be that we're reviewing what's required in terms of things like biodiversity net gain, using more complicated measures in terms of how that is understood and measured and secured, having regard to guidance produced by DEFRA and whatnot. But very simply, when it comes to it, if there are ecological or biodiversity interests on a site, a study needs to be done. If harm is identified, then the minimum that needs to be achieved is that it's mitigated. And then we can also consider as part of that enhancement and compensation. But how much you insist on that depends on the level of harm caused. And in this instance, I think they've been very upfront about the nature of the site, what protected species are potentially involved, how they may be affected, and have proposed mitigation and compensation in accordance with that. So yes, I am satisfied that it's been achieved.
Okay. Councillor Errington.
It was just a general question on the terms of the appropriate assessment, in that, as I understand it, one of our consultees can override our policy. Is what, to me, just to comment that that's what seems to be happening here, that we put it as a policy, and are we going to stick with that, or, you know, the next time something comes along, and I don't know, I feel a bit confused or not sure that we have this policy, but yes, a consultee will overwrite it. That's what I want to say. Thank you.
Okay.
Can I comment on that, Chairman, just so that I can give, just to give some reassurance to the committee, and I know that Mark addressed it. I don't think it's a matter of policies being overridden or that something lesser is happening in some way. You'll all appreciate that planning is a moving beast, and it just so happens that at the time the DASA was assessed, it was likely that the drainage for this site would be dealt with by way of natural surface water features or SUDS features, you know, features that replicate natural flow such that it might flow into the Pevensey levels. All that's happened is that an application's come forward. It's been demonstrated that groundwater infiltration isn't appropriate in this instance, such that you won't have those flows into the Pevensey levels, and that surface water will otherwise be directed to the highway drains. So it's just a change in circumstances, and the change in circumstances mean that Natural England say that there is no longer likely significant impacts on the Pevensey levels, such that whereas it says in the DASA that appropriate assessment should be undertaken, the fact of the matter is it's not required now. It can be screened out because likely significant effects don't exist.
Yep. Okay. Councillor Coleman.
Sam's basically just answered my question.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Barnes.
Yes, Chairman, I fear we're in some danger of doing what we accuse some developers of doing, of applying retrospective judgments to a period when this application was put in. And I don't think it's proper. I'm afraid I disagree with Councillor Projak. I don't think we can at the moment exert higher standards than were actually proper at the time on this particular development. I'm more worried about Councillor Thomas's point, but it comes down to a matter of fact, not a matter of Natural England's judgment, whether this will or will not have significance. But as I understand it, what is being said by the officers, and I think we do need to be very clear on this, is that if it goes into the drainage system, this does not go on to the affect the Pevensey levels at all, in which case an appropriate assessment clearly wouldn't be required. But I think we do need to be satisfied on that as a matter of fact. My major worry is twofold. We have a drainage system and we have a strip, quite a considerable strip of wildlife area, grass area mainly, but with some very good trees and with a badger set. And I'm wondering who is going to maintain that and what arrangements have been made for the ongoing maintenance, both of the drainage and of that area. And I wouldn't want to see it turn into parkland. It seems to me that is an appropriate wildlife area, but it will require some management. And I see nothing here. It might well be satisfied by a condition, but I see nothing here which absolutely guarantees the ongoing maintenance. We put a pre-application condition in about drainage, but perhaps one of the officers could point me to how we safeguard this for the future. That's my question.
Thank you. Sam or Mark? How are we going to ensure that this area is managed correctly and not turned into a parkland or whatever?
The area contains the suds drainage, and in that regard, we've got the condition 3, which requires, as part of the condition, a maintenance and management plan for the entire drainage system to be submitted for consideration and approval. So the actual drainage part, that will be covered by the condition in terms of management. But yes, what we haven't got is any details of who would manage the land within that southern paddock in the future. And that could be covered by condition, but yes, we do not have that information.
I think this is Mark, this is a concern that was raised at the site visit by a number of members, and I think the real concern is that is the, if you like, the gain on this. If we say gain, it is an essential part of keeping of this application is keeping that section as it is, not trying to beautify it or prettify it. And I think members would like to know how that can be ensured at this point in the decision-making process, so that somewhere later on the line something else happens to it, which would have affected this decision. So perhaps you could advise on that. Would it be appropriate that we put if it was voted for approval, that we ensure that a condition is placed on this to make sure that happens?
The land within the southern paddock wouldn't have access. It would be bounded to the south by the properties, the properties in Frights Way, and to the north, Morningsmead itself and the three new properties. Earlier Gardens would also enclose the land on that side.
I think it's not about being enclosed, it's about actually ensuring that it's managed and protected in the appropriate way over the long term.
Then that would have to be done by an additional condition if members are minded to grant the permission.
Well, let's talk about that in a minute. Councillor Harmer.
Thank you, Chair. And most of my questions have been asked very well. Thank you very much. Just a couple of things. It is a bit sad that we can't go back to, in terms of density, to 24 in way of a compromise with the residents. It's also sad that we're not building more bungalows because there is a great need and a shortage. Did I miss that we have electric car charging points for this development? And the other concern is I see in the report that one oak with a PTO is due to be cut down because it's got a problem with it, it's diseased or it's dangerous. And have we got reassurances that the rest of the trees with TPOs aren't to be cut down? Thank you.
Mark, can you address those questions?
One large oak tree at the side of Ellerslie Lane, that is referred to in the arboriculture report as being damaged, and that would be removed as well. If a TPO tree is diseased and dangerous anyway, an applicant or landowner could remove it without needing to submit a tree preservation order. The trees within the site, which are mainly fruit trees, they would be removed to facilitate the development. The main line of TPO trees running east-west along the bank and north-south along Ellerslie Lane will be retained. It's proposed to retain those as part of the development. So inevitably, some smaller trees within the site itself would have to be lost, otherwise you wouldn't build anything at all on the site.
Okay. Councillor Madeley?
Sorry, the charging points as well. Could you?
Oh, my apologies. Apologies, Councillor Harmer. Yes, you didn't address the issue of charging points. Mr. Cathcart?
There appears to be no indication within the application that charging points would be required. It could be possible to have charging points in some of the properties which have immediate on-site parking, but for others, that couldn't be achieved where the car parking is slightly rather more remote, or perhaps separated from the dwelling by a pavement, for example.
I think the answer is we don't currently have a requirement for charging points in our policies. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay. That's something for future change potentially. Councillor Madeley.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I find it quite extraordinary that we don't have this in our policy, electric charging points. We've managed to get them into Blackfriars and other places. I can't understand that at all. However, moving on, you were allowed for a pathway onto Ellerslie Lane, and also by having such a mixed development, you're obviously trying to encourage people to walk, take public transport, cycle, whatever, and yet all of this development falls straight onto Ellerslie Lane, which still has no safe areas for walking, pedestrians, children, whatever. Is there not something that can be done about this? It strikes me that, it's one thing having bungalows on a development where people travel by car everywhere, or mostly do, but where you've got a mixed site like this, pedestrians are important, and we're trying to encourage them. So why have we got this proposed development going straight onto a pavementless road? Thank you.
Mark?
I'm sorry, to be clear, do you mean the pedestrian access?
Yes, I do. The pedestrian access to the north of the site, straight onto Ellerslie Lane.
Well, a pedestrian access onto Ellerslie Lane is contained within the DASA policy BECS 7. The plan on the BECS 7 policy shows a pedestrian access, but that actually goes through the Lower Paddock, which is the area that it's now proposed to retain for its ecological value and prevent public access.
Councillor Madeley,
I don't actually understand that. I'm sorry.
No, I think, Councillor Madeley, I think what you were asking was, why is there no footway? I think we're confusing the word footpath and footway. Why it's a development with pedestrian access within it, but it goes on to a road without any easy pedestrian access. I think that's the point that Councillor Madeley was making. No, it was not footpaths. We're talking footways.
Thank you, Chair.
Did you want to add something, Sam?
Well, I was only going to say that obviously that is one of the routes within the scheme, but it's not the only route, and it's only been proposed in order to achieve, like Mark just explained, a policy requirement to have some link on that side. But Friart's Way is the main route here, and that does join onto Ellerslie Lane at a section where there are footpaths. So it's just an additional link within the scheme. But in terms of access to the town and doing that by non-car means, there is a safe route because it's along Friart's Way, which then later connects with Ellerslie Lane, which does, and the section of Ellerslie Lane, which does include footpaths. So it's just there's a part of it that does go directly onto Ellerslie Lane where there isn't, but it's not the only route.
Yeah. So okay, I hope that sort of answers the question. Councillor Errington.
Hi, it's regards to the conditions, and maybe it's a little bit early, but can we have construction time? They will be included, won't they? A little bit later on, bearing in mind the proximity of some of the new houses to the existing houses in Friart's Way. Also, what I'd really like to see in the conditions is something that we have in Pear Tree Lane, which is no access to construction vehicles along any part of Ellerslie Lane from the site northwards up to the junction with Turkey Road. Mark, is that possible? There's a sign at the top of Pear Tree Lane off of Ninfield Road which says no access to construction vehicles. I'm not sure if that was part of the conditions of Rosewood Park, but I wonder if we could make it conditional, because the Bexhill people will know, and we didn't really highlight this on our site visit, is that, as Councillor Madeley said, there is no footpath access up this part of Ellerslie Lane from the site northwards. Also, it isn't two-way. In many parts, it's only one way and vehicles have to pull over. So large vehicles, it's just not acceptable and it's not safe. Can also say that that is one of the routes to the main senior school in Bexhill, and also a walking route to a rather large primary school. So if we could get the construction traffic to come on the A259 and through the estate, which again isn't ideal, but it's better than a road where there aren't two carriageways and no footpath.
Okay, let's look at that when we come to the decision. I think there's a couple of conditions that people have recommended here.
Thank you.
Councillor John Barnes.
Oh. Yes, Chairman. It seems to me that one of the attractions of the changes that have taken place is that we retain the large semi-historic house and its gardens, and that actually is also of some benefit to nature. I listened with interest to Councillor Madeley. I doubt if the people who live on that part of Ellerslie Lane would want to have footways inserted and alter the character of the lane itself. So I wasn't quite sure what she was saying about that pedestrian access, whether she would want it removed, because the vehicular access is obviously quite deliberately not onto Ellerslie Lane, but onto Friars. Now, that has a problem, obviously, for the bungalows on Friars, but it is probably a safer access to handle the traffic. We're always going to get this problem when we get to the kind of development we want. I personally favour a mixed type of development rather than all bungalows. I have to say, it seems to me you are catering more for the needs of the community. And although I want some quite strict conditions put on this, I can't really see that we can go against the DASA policy of designating this for housing. And we have a viable application, which I suspect, if we were to turn it down, would succeed on appeal.
Thank you, John. Did you want to specify any specific conditions that you might want to ask for should this be approved? Is there anything? Because it'd be good to summarise that now.
My conditions are more about not being simply satisfied by what is being done about the drainage and about the wildlife area, but ensuring that those are looked after in the future. That obviously would require some kind of company to cover the houses, some kind of obligation on the houses themselves. The kind of condition is one I think we're quite familiar with, but it needs to be thought about specifically in this area.
Okay, I have a thought on that, which I'll give it towards the end. Thank you, John. Councillor, we have a few more people to speak. So we've got Councillor Norton, Projak and Drayson, and just Thomas to do a very quick end point. And I think then we'll try and bring together these thoughts on conditions before anyone proposes. Councillor Norton.
Yes, I empathise quite strongly with the residents of Friars Way. At the moment, they have a very peaceful environment. They have quite spacious grounds around their bungalows. And because they're living in bungalows, I guess that quite a number of them are elderly, retired people. Now, this development is going to seriously damage their quality of life. The height and proximity of the new buildings, the inevitable increase in noise, traffic problems in Friars Way, I think the local resident who mentioned that had a very cogent point. There is going to be congestion. It's going to be a much less pleasant environment for them to live in. That worries me. The other thing, if I can just add to what John said about Mollins Mead, we went up and had a look as close as we could. It's a very handsome Edwardian house. And I really wonder whether it's being preserved, but I really wonder whether it has a future. It's already up for sale. And my hunch is that it will become, it's not going to be a very popular place to buy with this new development so close. I suspect it's going to become more and more dilapidated. And I guess in the end it'll end up being demolished and there'll be more houses on the site. I think that's sad because it is a handsome building. Thank you, that's all I want to say.
All right, Councillor Prochak.
Just very quickly to support any kind of wording, if Mark Cathcart can help us with the wording to protect what is going to be the green space at the end. I don't know if other councillors have this in their patches, but where you have a fence that goes onto wildland, if you can call it that, what do gardeners do? They tip stuff over the fence. And there's got to be some protection there to make it a habitat which biodiversity can actually thrive.
Okay, thank you. Lastly, before Councillor Thomas gives just 1 or 2 minutes, Councillor Drayson.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's a slight observation for the officer in that it's about these bus stops, and I'm concerned that in its contribution, the Highways Authority have required the developer to talk to the Bexhill Community Bus. I am a director of Bexhill Community Bus. I'm not aware of any approach, and although we are looking to change routes to incorporate the road suggest, that's been put to us by East Sussex County Council and not the developer. I don't want to stand in the way, and obviously they should be putting bus stops, but if it's not Bexhill Community Bus, who the hell is going to supply a bus there if it's not there?
Is that a question to the officers or just an observation?
Yes, because I don't think they've got any say over where Stagecoach goes, and actually they don't have any say over where the community bus goes. It's a voluntary organisation.
Okay, all right. And finally, just a very brief point from Councillor Thomas.
Just very, very briefly, I agree with the points made by Councillor Norton. I want to emphasise the committee should have been told that this site is on the Pevensey Levels hydrological site. That you should have been told that. You should have been told what's actually in the DASA. I don't think it's at all acceptable that you weren't. And just to say that if an appropriate assessment had been carried out, then you would have had far more details about the drainage. There's virtually no details about how the drainage is going to work. There are concerns about floodwater, which you will see spelled out on 6.3.3, and you will see that preconditions have had to be imposed at 3.2, 3.3 and 3.4 because there is no guarantee that the actual system will be working. And so I would personally say, I would personally prefer a deferment until an appropriate assessment has been done.
Well,
I haven't got a vote, so I'm just pointing that out.
Thank you for that, and I'm going to finish our discussion and just come on to some thoughts on conditions subject to an approval. It may not be approved, but if it is, some conditions. But I just want to be clear, because my understanding, and please either Mark or Sam confirm or otherwise, that the water is going to go into the mains drain, which will go into the sea, so it will bypass the Pevensey Levels. Is that correct or not? Mark or Sam?
The proposal is for the drainage from the site to go into the highway drain.
And where will that water go? Will that water then bypass the Pevensey Levels or not?
It would not. Yes, it would bypass the Pevensey Levels.
Okay, that's all. That's a very straightforward answer. The water from this site will bypass the Pevensey Levels. Therefore, that is why there is no need for that appropriate assessment. There has been a change between the DASA and what it said and what is actually being proposed. So I hope that satisfies that point. I know it was a little confusing, but let's be very clear. So there's been a number of things raised for the officers to consider. The first is in relation to the wild green space being left, and the committee, from what I gather, or a number of members, would like to see, subject to approval, something more concrete in terms of how that management plan will be established. Now, we did do something for that application in Crowhurst, where it was referred to the county officer for agreement of a plan, and I'm wondering if that might be an approach here. Sam, do you have a thought on that? So that, or Mark, so that there is, you can give the committee confidence that a substantive plan will be considered with an environmental expert.
Yeah, I mean, we can certainly add in on a condition, first of all. That's fine. Mark's previously explained that part of it would be covered by the drainage condition, but obviously that doesn't include the whole of that area. So a separate condition for the maintenance management and the wildlife area, completely fine. Whether or not you then insist that that also is checked by the county ecologist is for you to decide, and we can put a note on the decision to that effect. I don't believe it's necessary in this instance. We've got details of what the mitigation and compensation is for the site. So effectively, the management and maintenance just needs to be some detail from the applicant or developer about who would do that and how they would do that. And I think it's perfectly acceptable for officers to consider when those details come in. But if you think that it needs that higher level of scrutiny, then certainly you can request that.
Okay, and the second issue, I think, if I've got it right, is that there has been a desire for a traffic management plan to include access only, and please, I think Sarah brought this up, only to be from the A259, and maybe there would be timescales during the day for that too. Sam or Mark, would you like to comment on how that would be conditioned?
There is a recommended condition number 5, requiring a construction management plan to be submitted. When we receive a construction management plan, we would normally consult with the County Council, with County Highways. The construction management plan would need to include the method of access and egress to the routing of vehicles to and from the site, and that will be assessed. The applicants or the developers' proposals for doing that will be assessed by County Highways, and they would tell us whether or not the routing is appropriate, and whether or not they can recommend acceptance of the construction management plan. So yes, it will be looked at.
All right, I know it's going to be looked at, but I think the concern was it might not be looked at quite in the same way that the members are thinking. They're thinking that the access to the site is poor from all angles, but best from the A259, and even though that's not perfect, would it be appropriate that we actually say that at this point in time?
I can just add to that on Mark's behalf. Although I appreciate members' concerns and the nature of the roads in that area are what they are. You've seen that from your visit, and they're already trafficked. I appreciate construction traffic raises an element of that, but like Mark said, the details of that are required by condition, and the best route and the safest route for construction traffic to enter the site is to be submitted, and we'll assess that in consultation with the Highway Authority. But I think you can be assured that means that it would be checked and it would be the most safest route. I don't think it would be appropriate at this stage to insist that it has to go one way or the other, bearing in mind that although I appreciate it and that there's some local knowledge there, it's a view and not necessarily based on highway data or safety data.
Okay, all right.
Chairman, can I, as a county member at the moment,
say
I don't want a desktop exercise on this. Can the local county councillor and district councillors be involved in that consultation? Because their local knowledge will be invaluable. Frankly, I think I do know something about Petrie Lane and Ellerslie Lane. I really think what is being said from the local point of view needs to be said by locals to the Highways Authority. So I would hope that the relevant councillors will be involved in that consultation.
Can we put a note on the application on the decision subject to approval that that they be consulted, Sam? Would that be appropriate?
I think maybe it can be dealt with in the same way that you discussed with Councillor Meir on the previous application, that if interested to be involved, condition applications are delegated. We don't consult members or residents on them routinely, but if people have comments on them, then they can make them known, and obviously they'll be addressed with the Highway Authority. Maybe that's the best approach.
I think so. I think we put our trust in that system, if you're happy with that, Councillor Errington. So would somebody like to move this application one way or the other, please? I think we're at the point to do that. Does anyone want to move a recommendation subject to conditions or otherwise? Doesn't sound like anyone's particularly excited about the moving this application. Well,
I move.
I'll move.
Well, I have one on my chat from Councillor Ganley. Councillor Ganley, what are you moving exactly?
I move approval.
Councillor Ganley is moving approval, and are you happy to move that subject to a note? I think we're doing it as a note that the county council ecologist be consulted on the management plan of the green site. Are you happy?
Yes, certainly.
All right. Is anyone prepared to second that application, that recommendation?
I'll second.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Tempe. On that basis, Sam, if you're happy with what's just been said, I will put it forward for a vote. Do you have any comment before it goes to the vote?
Only just to be clear, because I don't think we touched on absolutely everything then, but it's an extra condition for maintenance and management of the ecology area. Yes. The construction vehicle stuff is already covered by conditions, so that I think everyone's satisfied in that. Yeah, and a note for the county ecologist.
Correct.
And otherwise, then, you know, residents and members can get involved at the appropriate point in relation to the construction side of things.
Correct.
Details submitted. Yeah.
All right. On that basis, I'm going to hand it over to Julie for a vote, after which time we're going to have a very quick 10-minute break. All right. So, Julie, can I have you take a vote on that?
Okay, Chairman, I just want to clarify that I understand that Councillor Coleman didn't attend the site visit, so he will not be able to vote on this application.
Correct.
So, members, I will call your names out in alphabetical order. If you can say for, against or abstain. Councillor John Barnes.
For as amended.
Councillor Mrs Barnes.
For.
Councillor Errington.
For.
Councillor Ganley.
For.
Councillor Harmer.
For.
Councillor Johnson.
For.
Councillor Madeley.
Abstain.
Councillor Meir.
For.
Councillor Norton.
Against.
Councillor Prochak.
For.
Councillor Stevens.
For.
Councillor Tempe.
For.
And Councillor Reinhold.
For, at which point we are going to have a 10-minute break, which will take us to exactly 12 o'clock. So if you can just don't leave the meeting, just turn your cameras and microphones off, and if we can stop that live. This is the recommencement of the Raleigh District Council Planning Committee of Thursday, the 15th of April, and we are now going to move to the next application, which is RR 2019-1384. My apologies, P. That's Hilbury Fields, and I'm going to pass this to the officers. Who is presenting this, Sam?
Thank you, Chairman. Excuse me, I've got to jump on now because I'm freezing. This will be Mark Cathcart. And Mark, you don't have to request to control the presentation this time. It's just one slide for members.
Okay, thank you, Sam.
refreshment. So I'll just share that briefly.
Right, we have that. Commence whenever you want to.
It's okay. Do you have a site plan, please, Sam? Right, this is the site at Hilbury Field in Ticehurst.
There we go.
That's the development as approved. This is an application. The application now before you is an application to modify an existing Section 106 agreement in relation to affordable housing provision on this site. Planning permission has been granted for 30 dwellings, of which 12 were to be affordable and secured through a Section 106 agreement. The applicant now seeks to vary the Section 106 on the grounds that the economic viability of the scheme, and hence its delivery, can only be viable without any affordable housing units being brought forward as part of the scheme. Financial viability assessment has been provided by the applicants in support of the application. The application was previously considered by members in December 2019, when a decision was deferred for a further independent appraisal of the applicant's financial viability assessment. Since that time, there has firstly been the approval of a reserve matters application, which means that the details of the scheme can be factored into the development costs. Secondly, a further independent appraisal of the applicant's updated financial viability assessment has been carried out. The results of the second appraisal demonstrate that any affordable housing would only further reduce the scheme's viability and result in negative surplus. The housing officer has reviewed the findings of the independent appraisal and accepts that it is robust and shows that the scheme cannot deliver any affordable housing. The recommendation is as the report to approve modification of the Section 106 in respect to the provision of no affordable housing, but include a review mechanism allowing a further opportunity to secure any uplift in value that may be achieved as the scheme progresses. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. We have Chris Lockhead, who's a development director from Fernham Homes, and if you'd like to come on, you are. So you've got 5 minutes, and then we'll have questions should anyone want to ask you a question. Whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, members and officers. Thank you for the opportunity to address the committee this afternoon in relation to our proposed application to modify the Section 106 agreement at our approved scheme, Hilbury Fields, Ticehurst. I'm Chris Lockhead, Development Director, speaking on behalf of the joint applicants, Ticehurst Homes and Fernham Homes. I can confirm that Fernham Homes will be carrying out the delivery of this scheme. Fernham Homes are an SME house builder operating across Kent and Sussex. Our brand is built upon a strong track record and reputation for delivery of high quality new homes. This dedication was recognised through obtaining the Bronze Award for Best Small House Builder at the Watts House Awards 2019. Since this application was last brought before members for consideration, through extensive engagement with officers, the High Weald ANOB unit and the Parish Council, whilst making a number of amendments to positively respond to the comments received, Reserve Matters planning permission has now been granted. This provides certainty on the development proposals. Members previously sought for this application to be deferred to seek a second independent opinion in respect of the previously submitted viability assessment. This further assessment has now taken place with the benefit of the reserved matters approval. The Council's independent assessor's report clearly concludes that the development cannot support affordable housing either on-site or by way of an off-site contribution due to the extensive abnormal costs that are associated with this extensively complex and technically challenging site. Whilst these proposals are not at an acceptable level of viability, Fernham Homes are prepared to proceed to recover our investment in the project to date. A review mechanism is proposed to capture any surplus such that it can be directed to affordable housing provision in the district, ensuring that the scheme will always contribute the maximum it viably can deliver towards affordable housing. Fernham Homes fully endorse the officer's report and its recommendation. Approval shall facilitate the immediate delivery of 30 much needed new homes, and we therefore respectfully request that members endorse the officer's recommendation for approval. Thank you for your time, and I'd now be happy to answer any questions that members may have.
Thank you, Chris. I think a record 2 minutes. Certainly you get an award for that. Do members have any questions before the local ward member speaks? Any questions for Chris? Very pleasing that you've come along today. Councillor Drayson.
Yes, it's just one of background to get my brain sorted, Chair. Was your company, Chris, the initial company that sought planning permission for this location, or did you take it on after it had been granted?
Thank you, Councillor Drayson. We weren't involved in the initial application that was brought before the council by way of outline planning permission. Fernham Homes' involvement has been at the reserve matters and at this stage as the application gets moved forward towards its delivery.
Thank you, Chris. I can't blame you. I have to say that's a very unfortunate pattern that's happening across Rother. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Prochek.
Thank you, Chairman. It is a complex site, and before planning permission was given, it was very clear that it was a complex site. There's overhead cables and utilities, etc. And these are all evident at the time of purchase of the land. And when we've had training on viability, it's always the purchase of the land that's the sticking point if you're going to achieve your up to 20% profit. And knowing that there were complexities, why wasn't the cost of the land reduced?
Thank you, Councillor Prochak, if I may. So the way that development viability is assessed in planning terms assesses what's known as a benchmark land value, which is what's reasonably expected of a piece of land in a location with an incentivisation factor for a landowner to sell. It plays no bearing and resemblance on what is actually paid for the land. Here, our evidence that is put before the council is supported by an assessment by Savills, a leading firm of chartered surveyors, which assesses benchmark land value, and that's been agreed as being fair and reasonable by Altair, the council's independent assessor. The only one further point that I would make in respect of that, unless officers want to add anything further, is the amount used in the development appraisal put forward by Fernham Homes to the council is actually at a lower level than the council's own criteria set out within its own local plan viability study in respect of assessing benchmark land value.
All right, thank you for that. Do we have any other questions of Chris? We don't appear to have any questions. Well, Chris, thank you very much for that. Very succinct, and we appreciate that.
Thank you, Chairman.
Please stay in the meeting and wait for the vote, after which you'll need to leave. If you just turn your camera and microphone off. So I'm going to ask Councillor Barnes to speak. Councillor Mary Barnes.
Yes, thank you very much indeed, Chairman. If you remember, just after the election in 2019, I actually brought to the planning committee the evidence that we had two sites in my patch, no, not in my patch, one in my patch and one in my husband's, which had the same problem in that they were both centre village plots. They were on steep banks, and they were obviously going to be only popular to those who are after affordable housing. Both of them were asking for 40% affordable. This was in 2019, but if I can then go back to the original planning application, which was in 2015, and the planning committee did a site visit of the Ticehurst site, and we realised just how impossible this was going to be to make an easy job of delivering I think it was 30 houses that were going to be built on this site. For one thing, there was a very, very steep drop from the access road down to the site itself, which would have made building a road very, very expensive and actually quite difficult. There was the electricity substation, which has subsequently been completely brought up to date, but I'm not sure whether the amount of noise coming from that is still bad. There were huge drainage issues, one of which was to pump sewage from the bottom end of the site up to the top onto the road, to join the drains on the road. And we gave permission, but with severe reservations and with conditions that all those things which we were concerned about should be looked at. And even the most hands-off person looking at it on that day would have said, you can't build on this site easily. It's not going to be possible. So why we were in a position to be able to say something which it's taken developers some years now to sort out, which is to get the archaeological, to get the plumbing, the building and all the rest of it. Why is it now such a surprise that this site cannot offer any affordable housing whatsoever? So we've gone from 12 affordables, which was the only reason that the village was inclined to give it a sort of watery smile in the first place. It was a site which the entire village was against, and I would actually go so far as to say that the reason that the neighbourhood plan was given some traction is that those people who were on the committee were so absolutely worried sick about the building on that site. And it has gone on. It's going to seriously affect the village. We are left with a situation where, after Mark Cathcart has done a tremendous job, and I really must praise him for the way in which he has made the present plan acceptable. But I can't go along with this because, of course, for me, the whole of the development of this site is wrong. It is wrong because the village thinks it's wrong. I don't know if anybody's read the online comments, but the parish council is adamantly against it. It's in the neighbourhood plan only because they are able to say, well, okay, it's a reasonable development, but there isn't a word in there about the lack of affordable housing, because by this time everyone has assumed that this is, we're being fed a fait accompli. We had a training session not so long ago by an absolutely superb planning inspector who told us that we don't necessarily have to always take the view of the district valuer when it comes to deciding what is and what is not viable. We should be able to make our own decisions, and I hope from this meeting that what we will have is a very clear-cut way forward so that this sort of thing can never happen again. It is something that is, in my view, totally deplorable. And so what we are left with is a silly situation in the village, in that we have one site on the other side of the village which is not being allowed to have planning permission because it's not building its affordable homes. Where on earth is the rationale for all this? We really need to have a really good discussion about whether we can allow this sort of thing to happen again and whether we should be allowing it to happen now. I personally feel very strongly about this site, but I'd be very interested to hear what other people have to say.
Thank you very much, Councillor Barnes. That was Councillor Barnes speaking as the ward member in this particular circumstance. I'm just going to make a little sort of mini speech before we start on this. Okay, so this is an application that certainly this planning committee inherited. It went from a policy compliant to 3 affordable houses, and we deferred it with the intention with the belief that a proper viability or a different viability study might actually unravel it and find that there was more opportunity to find that there's even less opportunity at 0, and that's an issue. There are really very simple choices to be made here. As a committee, we either decide that we accept that some sites are viable for housing but not viable to deliver either the level or, in fact, any affordable housing. And I believe in the Tyso's plan there is another site that doesn't have affordable housing. It is in the neighbourhood plan, and so there is sort of a double presumption, if you like, because it's both got outline permission and in the neighbourhood plan. The affordable housing component is not a neighbourhood plan component. The strategic policy is that of the core strategy. I am the biggest supporter of neighbourhood plans, having started them in Rother, and most neighbourhood plans start with a difficult site, as it did in Settlescombe with Street Farm. It was not included in our neighbourhood plan, but did get approval. And that got approval because of the lack of our 5-year supply. In Robertsbridge, I think Grove Farm played that role and also ended up in their plan. So, you know, there's things that we can do and things that we can't do. This is a pretty straightforward question. You either decide that you're prepared to accept the site without affordable housing because there is a need for housing in Rother, or alternatively, you refuse it and consider whether an inspector will in fact uphold an appeal because it has a substantive viability study done by ourselves. So, and they're the questions. Now, we had very good training on Section 106's after and viability after that last this application came forward before, and that very much told us that you could refuse a policy non-compliant application where we still had a need for affordable housing. But I'm going to ask Sam Coleman to comment on that, because on the legality of that, because of course they couldn't go to appeal on the Section 106 at this point in time, but actually the application would expire before that anyway. So just before we go ahead, I'm going to ask Sam to comment on that, because it is a pretty straightforward decision, and I don't think we've been through the discussion and the arguments on any, you could see the site as a difficult site and they should never have come up with a policy compliant application. But I think we have to take ourselves forward from that. We know that argument, we accept it. So firstly, I'm going to ask Sam just to comment on the legal aspect of this now, with all the training and knowledge that we've had, because we have to make a good defensible decision on this application.
And do you want me to raise that, Councillor Coleman, or not?
Sorry? Yes, go on.
I will gladly defer to the expert in the room.
Oh, sorry, did I say Sam Coleman again? Did I do that? I've done that before, haven't I? I wondered why you were smiling. Oh, dear.
Sorry, Chairman. Joke at your expense.
Change your name.
Yes, and just to recap then what Councillor Vinehall summarised there, this is a simple decision before you, in so much as there are one of few options here. This application has been deferred already. It's been reassessed. That assessment has come back and shown that both from the developer's perspective and the independent assessors, in agreement with the officers, which include the planning officers and the affordable housing officer, that the scheme is not deliverable with affordable housing in a viable way. So the recommendation is to allow the change to the Section 106 for the affordable housing to be removed, with the previously mentioned clause to review that should there be any uplift in profits in the future, and that will be directed towards affordable housing. And so that's the recommendation, and you can go with that. Alternatively, yes, you can consider refusal, and that would be on the basis Well, firstly, actually, that'd be for you to decide if you wanted to do that. Councillor Vinehall did mention then that part of the reason for that would be that this is a request for a variation to the 106 within 5 years. And because it's within 5 years, there are no appeal rights because such variations are done in agreement with the council only. This isn't a formal application process. A formal application process would be available to the applicant if the Section 106 was more than 5 years old, which it won't be until the 6th of January 2022. However, if you do go for refusal, you have to be sure that you are satisfied that you've demonstrated that your reasons for refusal are reasonable, because any decision is still obviously subject to judicial review on the basis that the developer could argue that you've erred in law if you've made your decision unreasonably. And so just to expand on that, Councillor Vinehall there mentioned that potentially a reason could be that committee feel that affordable housing and its requirement and the fact that this 106 secures that means that 106 serves a reasonable purpose. However, you'll all be very aware from previous discussions since you've all been on committee for the last couple of years that taking into account viability is not only mentioned in the local plan, it's mentioned in the NPPF. There are separate guidance documents about how that's taken into account when you consider planning applications for housing development. So to ignore the fact that viability information has been submitted and to not refuse it without any technical or financial information to contest what the developer has put forward, I would suggest would be unreasonable if that's the route that you went down, but that's for members to discuss from now on. One of the other options that could exist is that if it were refused, well, there's two options in that scenario. So just to get the dates right, the planning permission for this site, now that reserve matters has been approved, expires on the 1st of December 2022. And I just mentioned to you that the Section 106 becomes 5 years old on the 6th of January 2022. So contrary to the conversation I had with Councillor Vinehall the other day, the Section 106 would actually still be live during the period in which the planning permission is extant. So it's not beyond the realm of possibility that if the application was refused today, that the developer could make a formal application after the 6th of January 2022 to have the viability matter assessed. And if that were refused, then they would benefit from full appeal rights. So not only would there be a risk of JR, like I just mentioned in this scenario, they would be able to the planning inspectorate. The other option, which is less likely, but nonetheless still one that's on the table for the developer, is they could just submit a new planning application, include all the viability arguments with it, and obviously if that were refused due to viability issues, then they would have full appeal rights in that scenario too. So sorry, a little long-winded, but hopefully that explains the 3 or 4 scenarios that could occur here. But I'm happy to take any more questions on that matter if there are any.
Did you want Amy Fern to make any comment on this application, Sam, or not?
Sorry, Chairman, I didn't catch that.
Did you want Amy Fern to make any comments on this application or not?
Not at this stage, no, but I suppose just to make the committee aware that Amy is with us this morning and she is here to answer any questions.
All right, so I'll move to Councillor Prochak.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, Ticehurst. I think we are between a rock and a hard place. It is very, very tempting to make some comment about developers and lobbying. Because what we're stuck between is guaranteeing in the viability study of up to 20% profit. And we've also got a planning permission there already. I don't think we have a choice, given that Sam very quietly spelt out the risks. So I really don't think we have a choice but to approve it.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ganley.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I won't be commenting on the loss of the affordable homes. My words would not be acceptable in a public platform like this. And by the way, they would not include any criticism of Ticehurst Homes, who have inherited this situation. I'd just like You and the development manager have explained clearly the two options available to us, refusal or approval. I would ask if a third option is available, not one that I would necessarily support, but I'd be interested to know if a compulsory purchase order is an option available.
Thank you, Councillor Ganley. I don't believe that's an option available for the planning committee. No, you may be aware that we've had this raised on a couple of occasions before, and clearly Amy Fern does a lot of work in the background to understand, to try and achieve the best for the site. But whether or not land is compulsory purchased, or we enter into negotiations with registered providers or other developers in order to pursue a better outcome for the site, that's separate to the planning considerations before you today. We've got this application here for viability, and it's either that it's acceptable or not.
Yeah, okay, understood. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Councillor John Barnes.
Yes, Chairman. We come back to a situation that faces us over and over again, and it's because really we accept outline without demanding a viability assessment at that stage. And the result is that these aren't hidden problems. As my wife has already said as the local councillor, these problems were evident from the very start. I happen to be the county councillor at the moment for this area, so I know it almost as well as she does. And the gradient here, the drainage problems, the existence of the power station and therefore overhead power lines are all highly visible. So in effect, I regret to say the original developer was going into this with eyes open. I have no blame at all for Ferndown Homes. I think they have done a very good job with our officers to actually produce a viable proposal. I think it is a matter for some consideration, but not today, whether we do need, when we draw up our new local plan, first of all, to ask for viability earlier, and secondly, to draw a distinction between sites where we expect affordable and sites which might be developed for the benefit of our housing total, which are acceptable, but where we know affordable is not going to be possible. All of those things are for discussion, but what we've got today is, as Councillor Prochak said, we're between a rock and a hard place, and we have to come down one side or the other. We have a 2.87 year land supply. This is a site which reluctantly has been included in the neighbourhood plan. I think on balance, given that Ticehurst has a very considerable proportion through its history of affordable housing, I think I'm probably going to have to come down on the side of saying we should go along with Ferndown Homes, subject, I think, to a perfectly proper provision that when we've got all the actual figures in place, we do test that the theoretical calculation has in fact been justified in the event. I'm sure it will be myself, but there it is. It is a very unusual situation. I think we have to do this very conscious that we shall be in breach of our own policy, in breach of the neighbourhood plan policy on affordable homes, and we are doing this with the utmost reluctance. But I think on balance, we are probably going to have to accept the reality of the situation and allow this to go ahead.
Thank you, Councillor Barnes. Two things. Firstly, the applicant has offered this viability calculation afterwards, the after calculation, and they aren't required to do that. So that is a small positive in the mix. And I will certainly pass the points that you raised on the core strategy to the lead member on planning as well. So could I have Councillor Stevens?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yes, this is a crying shame. I mean, Ticehurst are now going to lose 12 affordable houses. Exactly what happened in Rye. I mean, in these rurals, we need these affordable houses, and we're losing them all the time. Something needs to change. I don't know what, but it does. And sorry, Ticehurst.
So thank you, Councillor Stevens. I do believe that after the last application, the applicant was approached by a senior member of the council to see if there was any interest in selling it to the council, but I don't believe there was any response to that. That's just as an aside. Councillor Coleman.
Thank you, Chair. Rarely is the quasi-judicial nature of this committee more stark than when we're being forced to swallow sort of our sort of our ideals and our thoughts on things in order to almost feel like we have no choice but to follow what is unfortunately very clear and very firm policy that dictates we have to allow this to happen. And I mean I just place a lot of consideration on this review mechanism that needs to be triggered at an agreed stage, and to hope that review mechanism is able to find some way of delivering some sort of affordable housing in this site. But if I've read it correctly, but other than that, I think I just echo everyone else's statements.
Thank you, Sam. There's nobody else who wants to speak. I don't know if Councillor Mary Barnes wants a very, very quick wrap up. I think you used a fair whack of your 5 minutes or more at the beginning, but if you do want to just say one last word, then that would be appreciated, or two.
I haven't really a great deal more to say, apart from the fact that this is a matter of extreme sadness. And I know that everyone has worked so hard to try and get a positive resolution to this, but it's I feel almost like apologising to the parish council and to the neighbours who have worked so hard to try and get this application stopped. And I'm just I obviously this will not go through with my approval, but thanks folks for I mean, it's very nice to know that I have your sympathy.
Thank you very much. Look, we don't have any more people wishing to speak. Does anyone want to move the recommendation? Do I have somebody who'd like to? I don't think there's anyone who really wants to, but would somebody like to move the recommendation?
I'll very sadly move it, Chair.
Thank you. That's proposed by Councillor Prochak and seconded by Councillor Ganley. Can I hand it over to our clerk, Julie, to take a vote, please?
Okay, members, I'll call your names in alphabetical order. If you can say for, against or abstain. Councillor John Barnes.
For.
Councillor Mrs Barnes.
Against.
Councillor Coleman.
Abstain.
Councillor Errington.
For.
Councillor Ganley.
For.
Councillor Harmer.
Very sadly for.
Councillor Johnson.
For.
Councillor Madeley.
Against.
Councillor Mear.
Reluctantly for.
Councillor Norton.
Abstain.
Councillor Prochak.
Regrettably for.
Councillor Stevens.
Regrettably for.
Councillor Tempe.
Against.
And Councillor Vinehall.
Also regrettably for.
That's carried, Chair.
Thank you very much. A very difficult application. application. So we're going to move to the next item, which is 2020 1128/P, Granary Woodlands, and I think we have Councillor Johnson who needs to redeclare and I think leave the meeting. So I think is that correct, Julie? He needs to leave the meeting on this one?
Yes, he does, Chairman, yeah.
If you could leave the meeting and then come back in. And yes, so thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I do redeclare my interest in this agenda item 10, and I will forthwith leave the meeting. Thank you very much.
And we will invite you back shortly, hopefully. Yes, Councillor Field, I will ask you to speak in a minute. Can we have the officer's presentation, please?
And Chairman, I will just get that loaded now.
I think we have the yes, we have the yes, that's right. We have Robert Craddock, who's for the applicant in the meeting now. Good.
Okay.
Thank you. Progress.
Okay, so members will recall this is one of the site visits that were undertaken on Tuesday. So what we have before us is an application for a change of use of part of an existing agricultural barn into a dog kennel business. The barn will hold the kennels. The proposal also includes an external exercise area. And just to point those out as a reminder for you, this is the wider land holding of the applicant outlined in blue. The application site is a section of red. You'll recall that we approached the site along Neverfield Hill, and there's an access track that leads all the way up that to where the barn was located. Here's a block plan just showing that in more detail. Again, just to remind you from what it was that you saw on site, the red portion is the section of the barn that was to be converted. Members will recall that part of that work has already been undertaken. We otherwise have a series of fencing proposals to outline the dog exercise area. So the green line on here represents the fencing that would be placed on site to section off the exit from the kennel building itself. And that's a mesh fencing. And so dogs will be led along the path to where then you have these paddock exercise areas. The yellow or orange colour that you can see on your screen here is solid fencing. So that serves as an acoustic fencing to defend against sound travelling greater distances. And they're otherwise subdivided into 5 paddock areas, one of which will include some of those younger sapling trees that you saw on site. They're intended to be retained. During the course of the application, we consulted with Environmental Health, particularly to deal with what is probably the most pertinent issue of the application, which is the potential impact on the surrounding area in terms of noise, subject to mitigation measures, which include certain hours of operation, certain drop-off and leaving times, restrictions on number of dogs, improvements to the sound attenuation of the building itself. They've concluded that there is no harm that will be caused by development in terms of noise, and the officer has otherwise advised that the landscape impact of the development in terms of the use of the site and also the erection of the fencing would be limited, and therefore is also acceptable. So the recommendation is for approval.
Thank you very much. Firstly, I'm going to ask. We only have one public speaker, which is Robert Craddock, who I believe is in the meeting. If you could turn your camera and microphone on. Do we have you, Mr. Craddock? Mr. Craddock, do we have you to speak? I believe you're in the meeting. Claire or Julie, can you see Mr. Craddock there? No?
Yes, Chairman, he's shown that he's in the meeting.
Mr. Craddock, can you hear us? Right, okay, so we're going to ask him to come forward, but so we don't waste any time, we'll hear from the ward member, and we'll just seg back to him when he appears or can hear us. So I think Councillor Field wishes to speak first, and I'm not sure if Councillor Cook wishes to speak as well, but Councillor Field, would you like to speak?
Well, yes, I would. Thank you very much, Chair. First of all, I've had representations from people about the size of the plot, which in the paper says it's 20 hectares. I have been told, and I have got no evidence of this apart from people's words, actually it's 14 hectares and that only 7 of those 14 hectares belongs to the applicant and that another 7 are in the ownership of somebody else. I don't know if that's relevant, but I've been asked to raise that. I have, as usual, got a variety of questions and comments. First of all, 3.7 talks about dog waste being disposed of professionally. I would like to know what happens to it before it's disposed of, i.e. where's it stored, and does professional disposal require a tanker up and down narrow country lanes? 7.2.1 talks about the core strategy, and this limits development in the countryside to issues which support the local agriculture. Well, this isn't agricultural, this is kennels. Supports the economy or tourism. Again, not tourism, but it does provide 2 jobs, but only 2 jobs. And a development which maintains or improves the rural character. And that really, I think, brings us to the nub of the issue with this planning application. It is outside the development boundary or any development boundary, and it's in the AONB. And that's about more than landscape. The DASA, in fact, refers to tranquility as well as landscape quality, which brings us to what Mr. Batchelor referred to as the core matter, which is the noise, which is a difficult issue, isn't it? Because it's very subjective. But however you measure noise, the measurement is only relevant when the noise is being made. Industrial noise happens between certain hours and it's continuous. Dogs barking, it's totally unpredictable and therefore much more disruptive. Keeping dogs inside won't stop the barking. I speak as a dog owner here and I understand how dogs bark. And dogs will react to other dogs, not just those in their own kennels. They will react to external dogs. So I think the noise and the mitigation of the noise is a really difficult question. In its objection, Battletown Council asked for soundproofing, and I wonder how this is going to be possible outside. There are high fences mentioned, but we know noise travels over fences, and a 2.4 metre fence in the AONB is a very solid thing and very intrusive in this landscape of undulating hills and valleys. 7.4.9 talks about the dogs will be kept in a home environment, but actually they're going to be in kennels. My dogs in their home environment, when they want to go out, they scratch at the door. If I don't listen to them or don't hear them, then they bark, and they are used to coming and going as they want. And dogs who have been kept like this at home, I think, will react not particularly helpfully when it comes to only being allowed out at set times in the day. It takes longer than a kennel stay to train a dog to change its behaviour. And now in the report it also says it is demonstrated that the living condition of local residents will not be adversely affected. I don't understand what the evidence for this is, A, because it hasn't happened yet, and B, because noise is a very, very real issue. One of the conditions is that staff will have appropriate qualifications, and I would like to be assured how this will be checked and verified, and also that the dogs will be accompanied by qualified staff at all times. Well, you will have seen on your site visit that this kennels is down a narrow track behind a gate, which is usually locked. Again, how is anybody going to monitor what is happening with these dogs? And I have no reason to believe that there's any obfuscation intended here, but we have, if we set conditions, to be able to monitor them. And I really don't understand how that's going to happen. I think it's very sad to see somebody really enthusiastically trying to start a new business, but I genuinely believe this is the wrong place to do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. I believe we now have Mr. Craddock back. Do we have Mr. Craddock?
Yes, I'm here.
If you could turn your you've got a microphone on your video on too, if you're happy to do that.
Yes, we are on.
Good. And I can't see you yet. that you have 5 minutes to speak, and then if members have questions, they will ask, after which I just ask you to remain quiet with your camera and video off and wait for the vote at the end and then depart. So whenever you're ready, please start.
Thank you, Chair, and hello, good afternoon, councillors. My name's Mr. Craddock, as you've been told, and I am the uncle of the lady that's proposing for these kennels. Kimberly is extremely passionate about her dogs and always has been ever since I've known her, and the welfare and qualified in canine care behaviour, and has 6+ years working in the kennel environment, up to managerial status in her last job. Her partner is also qualified in canine behaviour and is well being qualified as a groomer. Their business ethos is very much one-to-one attention, interaction to stimulate the dogs, being walked and playing sessions. Plenty of fuss will lead to contented dogs. The kennel plan is for 16 kennels with a maximum of 25 dogs at any one time. This number will allow us to board multiple dogs from the same household if needed. The number of dogs will vary week on week, and the proposed barn is situated down our own gated lane with 2 other properties on site which have a right of access. The arrivals and collections for these kennels will be limited to a small window of time, mornings and evenings, to minimise the detrimental effect of the local residents. And our main business will come from overnight boarding, with daycare being offered to existing customers if need be. For example, if someone needs dog care for, shall we say, a day for funeral services or a wedding, then for existing customers, we will facilitate this, but it is not intended to be daycare for people that are going to work regular every day. So the amount of traffic that's going to be coming up and down the lane is only going to be to drop the dogs off when they go away for their holidays and come back and collect them a week or 2 weeks later, whichever that may be. And our plan is to make the business a higher end of the market, i.e. the dogs will be walked regular on our own private land, chaperoned at all times, and the fenced paddocks, which you were alluding to earlier, will allow off-lead exercise. Every consideration has been made to noise as much as possible. The paddocks are the rear of the building. Further down the hill, surrounded by the woodland, the external fencing of this area will be acoustic, specified by environmental health. And the internal fencing will be half-boarded at the bottom to prevent dogs from seeing each other, which will in turn stop them interacting. They will be supervised, and no more than 5 dogs will ever be outside at any one time. The barn is fully insulated, as well as the individual kennels being insulated too. The doors to the frontage of each kennel, which will have obscure glass to stop the dogs seeing each other, but will allow natural daylight to come in. So obviously they won't be seeing anything movement outside of the barn, which could affect their barking. And the dogs will enter by the side door, not the large door on the front. The acoustics survey carried out concluded that the noise from the dogs and kennels will have no noticeable impact, and that on the outside will be minimal. And the business will enable to deploy a small number of local staff on a full and part-time basis. And every precaution has been taken to prevent damage, cause unnecessary impact on the environment. And natural wood has always been the use of fencing. Wood chips will be used to form the paths to those paddocks, and they will be placed far enough away from ancient woodland. And that, Chair, is my statement.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I do have, it's all got a little out of order today, but did anyone have a question? I've got a few people who wanted to speak, but these are just going to be questions for Mr. Craddock at the moment. So I had John Barnes. Did you want to ask a question of Mr. Craddock, or are you going to wait till after that?
My question was really on the presentation. So I'll
Yes.
wait and ask you
Okay.
in a moment.
That's fine. Councillor Ganley, was your question to Mr. Craddock?
It is, Chairman, yes.
Yeah, well, please go ahead.
Good afternoon, Mr. Craddock. There, among the objections is one regarding dog waste. I really don't see how, given that it is private land, I really can't see why it would be of any concern to anyone other than a landowner. But could you confirm that the dog waste will be picked up by the permanent employees?
Oh, absolutely. Thank you. Yes, we have an airtight container bin that will be collected. I think it's once a fortnight environmentally to be disposed of. We don't leave any waste on the ground at all.
Yeah.
So it will be picked up, bagged in disposable bags and collected on a fortnightly basis.
No, that's what I would have imagined. Thank you. And that also answers one of Councillor Field's points. Thank you for that, Mr. Craddock.
Yeah, Councillor Prochak, you have a question for Mr. Craddock?
First of all, congratulations on seeing a business opportunity with the increased dog ownership. But there have been rather a lot of objections, as you will have read in the report. The one that I wanted to ask you about, which I didn't really understand, when we drove there in the coach, it was quite a feat for our coach driver, and he was congratulated on getting into sight this very narrow road. And there's a comment that the 600-yard long track would suffer up to 50 vehicles a day all year long. And the comment was that this could effectively leave us landlocked and would cause severe damage to our shared drive. Could you explain how the shared drive works, please?
Well, yes, of course I can. Thank you. They obviously said the drive is actually owned by us, but it is shared with two other properties on the site, of which we maintain it to a third cost each. In regards to the amount of traffic that they're saying that goes down there, that would only be if it was a daycare centre and those cars come in and pick it up night and evening. Morning and evening. You will find that the kennels are predominantly designed for holiday makers, people going away on holiday, whether they're going to this year or not, beside the point. And obviously they'll come and drop them off on the week they go and come back a week later. So during that week they wouldn't visit. And if you've got 16 kennels, that's only 8 people coming. And even if it's once a week, it's probably 2, maybe 3 cars a day. Obviously I said in my statement, the only time that we will have a daycare is if it's a regular customer who has got to go to, i.e. a wedding or a funeral.
All right, thank you very much. Councillor Mear.
Good afternoon. The barn is only a couple of years old, or it appeared to be, and we saw it got permission, I think, 2017, about then. What has happened to the original purpose for which the barn was built and granted permission? Why is it no longer needed after such a short period?
Thank you for that, Councillor. It's actually the people have changed, moved out. That Kimberley's bought the property, and obviously it was for rescue horses and for hay storage, that sort of thing. We no longer do horses or need to keep hay. The hay is taken off the field by a local farmer. And Kimberley is looking to start a business that will see her through her working life.
Thank you. Thank you.
Councillor Tempe.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm not sure if this is, good afternoon, Mr. Craddock, if this is for you or maybe for Sam Batchelor. Councillor Field mentioned that someone had said that not all the land was owned.
Lost, I can't hear her.
Did you hear the question?
No, I couldn't hear the question, sir.
Could you ask the question again, please?
Oh, yeah. Councillor Field, I'm not sure if you were actually able to hear what she was saying earlier about the fact that there's a possibility that not all the land that you're proposing for the exercise area or the business is owned by the family.
Yes, 100%.
Okay, so that's an incorrect assumption then.
Yes, no, the only part of the ground that doesn't belong to us is way to the south, which belongs to one of the other properties on site. But where the barn and the kennels are going to be is all in our own ground.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Councillor Cook, who is also going to speak in a minute, but you've got a question specifically, Councillor Cook.
Thank you very much. No, this is what I was going to speak about. I'd like to ask Mr. Craddock a question, please. I've received several messages from residents expressing concerns about the increase in traffic and the potential increase in noise, which Councillor Field has already commented on, so there's no need to me to repeat her statements. But I would please like to ask you a couple of questions. Firstly, Rother District Council has declared a climate emergency as in the process of completing an environmental strategy. Could I ask you what your plans are to ensure that this development will have almost or completely a carbon neutral footprint, please?
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon. Yeah, well, obviously, for the time being, we're running on obviously the natural electric, but we've got everything in the barn is low energy. The bulbs are all LED. We have the heating in the winter. We're heating each kennel individually. So if we have only 2 or 3 dogs in, we only need to heat one part of it, and it's all controlled, temperature controlled by thermostats. In the summer, it's the same. We have because it's well insulated. It doesn't get hot in there, so we don't need electric to take the air out. Obviously, in future, if the business is up and running, we intend to do the roof in solar panels in hopes that it would be offset by putting those on the roof. But at the minute, obviously, it's standard. The wood we've been used is all natural building materials. As I say, wood chippings for the path, and eventual planting around the fence lines. But as far as the environment goes, that's our plans for the future. But obviously, we can't put those in until we know where we stand.
Yeah, that's understandable. Thank you very much. That was very helpful. And secondly, I wonder if you could elaborate on your comments about local employment. Can you elaborate a bit on what age profile you'll be seeking to employ and whether this will be a part-time or a full-time basis?
Of course I can. There will look obviously once it gets up and running, there will be probably 2 full-time members of staff, with 1 to 2, maybe 3 part-time staff, and then obviously weekend walkers, because obviously it's going to be the dogs are going to be chaperoned the whole time when they're out of the building. So ideal for youngsters just leaving school, universities, that sort of thing. Or even for the retired people that just want to have 2 or 3 days work during the week, walking dogs. School leavers, perhaps, and also we would look to some of the youngsters, if they want to go, we would put them forward for the qualifications in the canine and the welfare, and also first aid should it be necessary.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much indeed. No further questions, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Madeley. Last one before we.
Excuse me. Thank you, Chair. Yes. Good afternoon, Mr. Craddock. I'm not a dog owner, but it concerns me, and I'm hoping this question I'm correct in referring it to you. But a couple of items came up under the proposals. One is that if you had more than 1 dog per family, they would go into the same kennel. Kennels didn't seem very large to me on that basis. Secondly, I don't think I'd want to be locked up between 6:30 p.m. and 8 a.m. with my legs crossed. Can you help, please?
Yes, of course. Thank you. All all the kennels, the 16 kennels that are in there. If you visited site, you would notice that the end kennel is suitable for 4 dogs because it's 3 times the size, and the kennels themselves are I think it's 22% above the standard size for the licensing for the kennels themselves. So obviously the licensing authority for the kennels states what size they should be, and we've far exceeded that. So yeah, and as for your other point, most dogs will be let out, and as you'll rightly say, go in at 6:30. But there will be people on site up until 9, maybe 10 o'clock at night that will be there to take dogs out should they need it.
All right, thank you for that. Strictly speaking, that sort of is a welfare question, not a planning question, but it helps just for you to answer that question because I'm sure it's in people's minds. But of course, it's not our job to be considering the welfare issues. That's obviously the consideration of whoever is the licensing body. We have. Let's finish off the questions to the applicant. I will ask. Did Councillor Cook, who is the one of the ward members, actually want to say anything more, or you could wait till the end if you decided which one? I think we've got a bit out of order here, so apologise for that.
No, I'm perfectly happy with the questions I've asked and the answers I've received. Thank you.
Right, thank you. I only have one question from Councillor Barnes. Councillor Prochak has had to leave, as she said she would at 1 o'clock. So Councillor Barnes, did you have something that you wanted to ask of the officers? You're on
Sorry,
now.
I'm having microphone trouble. Can you hear me now? Yeah. I've got 2 questions. One will probably require a map. I am slightly concerned about visual intrusion. I wonder if there are any footpaths in the area, public footpaths. If the answer is no, then we don't need a map. If the answer is yes, I'd quite like to see where they are. My other question, while Sam is thinking about that, is given the noise situation, is it possible and would it be acceptable to give a temporary planning permission and assess at the end of a period whether this was an appropriate use?
There's a good question for officers. Sam, can you ask the question? This is an application for permission, but can we actually give a temporary permission of any kind?
Yes, so you can consider a temporary permission, but if you put a condition on to that effect, it would need to be reasonable. So that means that it has to be justified. So in that respect, you've got quite conclusive comments from the environmental health team in terms of the likely impact of the development. So there's no hesitation from them. So what test period you would need in order to justify a temporary permission, I don't think exists, but it's something for you to consider.
What about relative to the difference in opinion on the volume of traffic that might come down the access road?
I think that's a similar issue, and I think that the speaker gave quite a good response in that respect. Yes, there is an extreme example where if all they dealt with was day business and they were fully booked, then there might be a high number of vehicles. But you have to make a judgment about what is likely here, and that is highly unlikely. What you're very likely to have instead is a mixed business where you've probably got longer term stays, and there are conditions that controlling when people can arrive and leave in terms of dropping off and collecting their dogs, such that traffic movements aren't likely to be high. And I see no reason why the extreme scenario would be one that would be reality, such that would also then justify a temporary permission. So from an officer's perspective, I don't think it's justified, but of course you can consider it, but you have to be satisfied that you think that it's justified and the reason for that is appropriate.
Well, I'm good.
And sorry,
there you go.
Just the public footpath question, I did check beforehand. The only public rights of way in the local area are actually south of the site on the other side of Netherfield Hill. I did note that on the OS map there were annotations showing paths. Whether or not they exist or not, I don't know, but they are not public rights of way that are maintained by the county council.
I'm just going to ask. I'm actually going to ask the applicant a question. Is Mr. Craddock there?
Yes, I'm still here.
It's just one question for you. Would you be prepared to accept a temporary permission for a period of time to ease the residents' concerns?
Yes, if that's what you're suggesting, but I see no reason why we can't have full planning anyway. We've also got to live down here. You know, we're not going to want to have dogs barking 24/7. That's not what we're in the game for. So you've got to make your own call on that.
All right, thank you very much. Councillor Ganley.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. It seems most of the objections concern noise. Well, there will be double insulation. The barn itself will have walls and roof insulated, and the kennels within the barn will also have their walls and roofs insulated, so there'll be very little noise emanating from the inside, where the dogs are going to be spending, something like 19 hours in every 24. They'll be outside for a maximum of 5 hours a day. And I walk my dog most days and encounter many other dog walkers. The dogs bark very little, if at all. They're too busy sniffing at each other's rear ends. There's a condition limiting outside lighting, or at least that's proposed, which I think would answer the objections about possible floodlighting. Battletown Council considers that this is an inappropriate use of the site, but fails to explain why it considers the site to be inappropriate. From my point of view, the project would bring employment opportunities to Battle and provide a service to the community. So I'm minded to support the application. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. And Councillor Barnes.
Yes, I found comments on appropriateness or not somewhat odd. It's difficult to know why this would be inappropriate to a rural area. My concerns would be twofold. One, I think, is I'm partially reassured. I have to say the notion of post-boarding fences of that size, which will stand out in the landscape, is going to be a major visual intrusion on the AONB. But since there are no public footpaths in the area, that mitigates the harm. But it really does worry me. I would have preferred actually the fences not to be close boarded. I realise you do have to have fences and walking areas, but close boarding will be so out of keeping that frankly I do find that worrying. I'm not so worried about the noise point, but I can understand why people are. And the reason why I was approaching the possibility of a limited time, say 2 or 3 years, is that will give you a very clear indication of whether there were going to be major complaints about noise, which would be investigated by environmental health. And it would also address some of the traffic concerns. It is an unusually narrow drive. I have to say, I'm not quite clear how cars are going to pass one another on it. So I see a number of problems which are not really the fault of the owners of the site and have very little to do with the business. But it does seem to me that at least we should consider whether we make this a permanent planning commission first time out. I have to say, if it comes to a straight yes or no, I will probably support this application, but I think I would prefer it to be time limited, at least in the first instance.
All right. Thank you, John. So here's a few points to consider. The owners the owners living there could could privately have as many dogs as they wanted to without any permission whatsoever. So I think one has to put that in perspective. In my own personal circumstances, I've had up to 4 dogs at any one time. I think the point is that, that they generally don't make a lot of noise. The welfare issues are not for this committee. I think that the officers has explained that environmental health have said what they're going to say, and if there are enforcement issues, that's what they're there for, to enforce them. I think it would be concerning for neighbours to have too many cars going up and down an access road, which is a private access road, so it's not it's not a highways issue. Somebody mentioned floodlighting, and I think that is potentially an issue. And perhaps the officers would like to comment on whether that's, I can't remember whether they have actually conditioned that, but perhaps that is something that could be looked at as well. Sam, is that a condition within this application at the moment?
It is, Chairman, yeah, that there is no floodlighting. So if they wanted any, they'd have to apply for planning permission.
Well, thank you for confirming that. Councillor Ganley, you're moving for approval. I've got nobody else asking to speak, so we have a move for approval. Does anyone else want to second that move? That motion, do we have anyone seconding that motion? Seconding the motion?
Can we just have a little more comment on temporary, time limited? Because really what I would be wanting is to test that this doesn't give rise to problems. But fundamentally, I think it's an appropriate business for a location.
Well, I think we can ask Sam again. I think he was pretty clear in what he said. He said that he feels that the things that might ask, you might justify or try to justify a temporary permission have been dealt with fairly thoroughly by the officers. So, they haven't shown concerns. If they'd shown concerns about it, I think that would be a ground for temporary permission. And I'm also, I feel a temporary permission would be a good thing. The applicant who I asked has said that he wouldn't object to it, but he doesn't see why he couldn't get full planning permission. And therefore is also saying at the same time that he wouldn't necessarily accept that. So I don't know if you want to add anything more to that, Sam. Did you want to add anything more to that, Sam Batchelor?
No, only just to reiterate that I think I can give a clear officer view that I don't think that it is necessary. But I suppose Councillor Ganley, in moving it, can clarify whether that's as per the recommendation of officers or with additional conditions for temporary permissions.
It has been moved, so we have to test that out. Councillor Ganley, did you want to move the application as it stands?
Yes, I do. I would not support a limited time.
Okay, well, I'm prepared to second that to get a vote done on this application. So I'm going to second it, and I'm going to hand it to Julie to take a vote, and we'll see where we go.
Okay, Chairman, just to clarify again that Councillor Coleman didn't attend the site visit, so he won't be voting on this application, and also that Councillor Prochak has now left the meeting.
Correct.
So she won't be voting either. So members, I'll call your names in alphabetical order. If you can say for, against or abstain. Councillor John Barnes.
For.
Councillor Mrs Barnes.
For.
Councillor Errington.
For.
Councillor Ganley.
For.
Councillor Palmer.
For.
Councillor Madeley.
For.
Councillor Mear.
For.
Councillor Norton.
For.
Councillor Stevens.
For.
Councillor Tempe.
For.
And Councillor Vinehall.
For.
That's unanimous, Chair.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Grad. If you could leave the meeting now, and we're going to move on. We have 4 applications. These are applications for members of the council. We didn't visit the site. I think there are photographs of the sites to help us along. I would recommend that they're all really actually quite small applications, but are required at the moment to come to committee. I will just make the point that the development manager is looking at alternative ways of dealing with these particularly small applications, because they do take officers of the committee unnecessarily or disproportionate, I should say, not unnecessary, disproportionate amount of time. And so I would suggest that unless people have a significant objection, that we sort of restrict discussion so that we can move through them relatively quickly without missing any key points. Thank you.
Move approval of this one.
2020, oh, that's quick. 2020-2465/P. Well, I'm glad you've moved approval, but I think he needs to do his presentation. So and I think Councillor Errington does have a question about this. So can you just do the review of this one, please?
I can indeed, and the quickest thing is just to show you the plans and the photos, so you get the idea. So application for the erection of a conservatory to the rear of the property. This is the site from Dover. Slightly zoomed in, that's the location of the extension on the rear. That's the side elevation of it, and in terms of the existing. Sorry, existing because it already exists. So that's the rear elevation, so that's the building there. And of course, the photos give you a much better idea. That's the building from the rear and from the side. Recommendation for approval.
All right, and just before we take a motion on that one, Councillor Errington would like a clarification on the difference between the planning permission and the lawful development certificate. Sam?
Yes, Chairman. Of the next 4 applications, 2 of them are planning applications and 2 of them are lawful development certificates. A planning application is what someone would submit when they require planning permission to erect the proposal. A lawful development certificate is what someone would submit in order to establish that the thing that either exists already or that they propose to build does not require planning permission, and so they would submit a lawful development certificate instead. These 4 applications are all householder developments, but the reason that some are planning applications and some are lawful development certificates is because the planning applications are for things that are not permitted development and so therefore require planning permission. But the lawfulness applications, one is because the proposal is for something that is permitted development. The other, which I'll explain when we get to that application, is for something that's immune from enforcement action because it's existed for more than 4 years and as such also doesn't require planning permission. So the difference between the 2 is a planning application is something that needs planning permission and a lawful development certificate is to establish with confirmation from the council that whatever is proposed or exists does not require planning permission.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So we have a proposal for this and we have a seconder. So I'm going to ask Julie to take a vote. Julie.
Sorry, caught me out then. Right, members, I'll call your names in alphabetical order. If you can say for, against or abstain. Councillor John Barnes.
For.
Councillor Mrs Barnes.
For.
Councillor Coleman.
For.
Councillor Errington.
For.
Councillor Ganley.
For.
Councillor Harmer.
For.
Councillor Johnson.
For.
Councillor Madeley.
For.
Councillor Mear.
For.
Councillor Norton.
For.
Councillor Stevens.
For.
Councillor Tempe.
For.
And Councillor Vinehall.
For.
That's unanimous.
Thank you very much. Next application 2021/1650 or O, sorry.
All right, thank you, Chairman. I hope you can see that again.
Yep.
Yep, so the reason that S has a different suffix at the end and it's an O is because this is one of those lawful applications that I mentioned. So this is for a proposed single-storey extension. Application site is at the end of the cul-de-sac, Millview Road here. The applicant wishes to place the extension on the rear of the property here. This is a drawing showing the proposed extension. As you can see, the pitched roof and mono-pitched roof addition to the building. Just to give you a bit more context, that's a photo of the building as existing. So it'd be in place of that flat roof extension you've got in that picture at the moment, and it extend across the full width of that. Having regard to the criteria for permitted development as they're laid out in the permitted development order, the scheme complies with all of that. That takes into account things like the width, the depth, the height of the property, its relationship to the boundary, the type of materials they use, etc. Having considered those, it's considered that the proposal does comply with the permitted development order and that there are no other restrictions that prevent the development. So the proposal is considered to be lawful and the certificate can be issued.
Good. Does anyone we have a move for approval from Councillor Ganley, and I'm going to take it as a second from Sam Coleman. So can we move that to a vote, please, Julie?
The names in alphabetical order. Councillor John Barnes.
For.
Councillor Mrs Barnes. For. Councillor Coleman.
For.
Councillor Errington.
For.
Councillor Ganley.
For.
Councillor Palmer. For. Councillor Johnson.
For.
Councillor Madeley.
For.
Councillor Mear.
For.
Councillor Norton.
For.
Councillor Stevens.
For.
Councillor Tempe.
For.
And Councillor Vinehall.
For.
That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you very much. Next application 2021/32/000. That's 38 Battlegates.
Thank you, Chairman. So this is another lawfulness application for you. This one is for existing development because it already exists. In this instance, the proposal would not be permitted development in normal circumstances because it is a roof addition to a property that sits within the A or MB. However, the applicant has been able to demonstrate that the proposal has existed in excess of 4 years, 4 years being the critical date in this instance, because for operational development, which includes physical alterations to somebody's home, if something has existed for more than 4 years, it is immune from enforcement action and therefore by default lawful. Just to quickly show you some details of that. That's the location of the property, again at the end of a small cul-de-sac. The dormer to the rear of the property that we're interested in, the roof plan and an elevation showing it. This is a building control certificate showing the completion date of the works, which predates 4 years of the submission of the application, May 2016. And there's a series of aerial photography. This is the earliest one, 2013, showing that there is something in place there. And that's a photo showing it now. And so the conclusion of the case officer is that on the balance of probability, which is the test in law, that the development has existed for the requisite period of time and is lawful.
All right, thank you very much. I do have a mover and a seconder, but I do have Councillor Barnes who put their name up. Did you want to say something?
I do, Chairman. I really think that we're being put in a thoroughly invidious position. We obviously have to recognise that this is legal, but the notion we should approve something that would have been against policy had somebody noticed it in time worries me. I certainly can't vote for this. I'm considering whether to abstain because it clearly is now out of time. It therefore has to be recognised. But why we as a planning committee should be asked to legitimate a breach of planning permission, I find that very invidious.
All right, thank you. I think we all understand the issue with some of these applications. I thought I actually had somebody proposing it and somebody seconding it, but it's a little bit. I do have Councillor Ganley moving for approval. I'm not sure if I had Councillor Madeley seconding it. Did I? Can I have a seconder for this?
Yes, you did. You did.
Oh, it's seconded by Councillor Madeley. So I'm going to put this to Julie to take a vote on.
Okay, members, I'll call your names in alphabetical order. If you can say for, against or abstain. Councillor John Barnes.
Abstain.
Councillor Mrs Barnes. For. Councillor Coleman.
For.
Councillor Errington.
For.
Councillor Ganley.
For.
Councillor Harmer.
For.
Councillor Johnson.
For.
Councillor Madeley.
For.
Councillor Mear.
For.
Councillor Norton.
4.
Councillor Stevens.
4.
Councillor Tempe.
4.
Councillor Vinehall.
4.
Carried, Chair.
Thank you. And the last of the applications is 2021/31/P. This is 14 Cornwall Road planning application.
Thank you, Chairman. Yep, so the last one for you today, another householder extension, this time to the rear of an existing property. So this is within Cornwall Road, a series of mostly terraced properties, all with out triggers at the rear of them. Rather unusually, and we'll see some photos of this in a second, the rear of these two properties include bay windows on the side, so that's why an extension is proposed, not from the rear of the existing building here, but to the side of the out trigger at the rear of the property here, because in that way the applicant can maintain their bay window feature that they have. So this is a plan showing that in a bit more detail. That's the bay window that I mentioned, which is existing. There's an existing extension to the rear of the property already. And they intend to infill this space to provide a utility and downstairs WC. These are the elevations of that proposal. Again, side on, looking at the out trigger and that bay window, and then linking in the side and the rear. It's a photo of that space. So it's in here. And then just to give a bit more context, that's one taken from the floors above, just looking down. So essentially where that shed is located is where we're talking about the location of the extension. Okay, it's recommended for approval.
All right, do I have anyone who would like to, I have Sam Coleman recommending for approval. He seems to be recommending for approval and seconding at the same time.
Second.
It was either or, Chair, depending on whether someone got there first.
And we have that seconded by, sorry, I didn't hear the voice.
Kathy.
Kathy Harmer, Councillor Kathy Harmer, thank you very much. And so if we could take a vote on that.
Okay, members, I'll call your names in alphabetical order. If you can say for, against or abstain. Councillor John Barnes.
4.
Councillor Mrs Barnes.
4.
Councillor Coleman.
4.
Councillor Errington.
4.
Councillor Ganley.
4.
Councillor Harmer.
4.
Councillor Johnson.
4.
Councillor Madeley.
4.
Councillor Mear.
4.
Councillor Norton.
4.
Councillor Stevens.
4.
Councillor Tempe.
4.
And Councillor Vinehall.
4.
That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you very much. That concludes the applications. There is at item 15, a list of appeals, and I think the only one to make a comment on at this point, unless people is welcome to have any questions to the officers, the appeal for Buckholt Lane appears here, which members will recall some time back, and I think Sam Batchelor wanted to give a briefing on this one, but there just hasn't been quite enough time to get the detail ready for this committee, but he will report on that more fully at the next committee. Councillor, yes, Mary Barnes, did you have a question for the officers?
I suspect it's both of us. I had 2 comments. One, I'm wondering how much more we can take from Mr. Helliwell, who appears to come back on appeal over and over again. There must come a point at which this is treated as vexatious. That's 2255p. It's simply taking a lot of officer time unnecessarily, and I really am concerned that over and over again he simply comes back with a different appeal. The other one I did want to comment on, which really worries me about the way it came about, was on Ashwood at Burwash Weald, where the developers felt compelled to appeal because we haven't actually been able to resolve the matter. I think, given the amount of time that the developer has given to the local community and the modifications he's made, I think we're putting ourselves to quite unnecessary expense by not having resolved that one. And I have to say I'm totally on the developer's side.
Thank you. Sam, did you want to make a comment about that? Both of those? About the Brightling one and about the nursing home?
Yes, I mean, for the Brightling application, I take the point that Councillor Barnes is clearly disappointed with the fact that this keeps coming around. However, if there's a planning application and a decision is made on it, then they always have appeal rights. Clearly, whether or not there's something to investigate in terms of accepting applications in the first place, we'll have to consider. But I'm not quite tied often in that respect. There are clauses within the Town and Country Planning Act that can stop us dealing with repeat applications, but we have to make a judgment about that when they're received. So maybe that's something to consider going forward in terms of that and that site. Ashwood Nursing Home, and yeah, officers are clearly disappointed with that as well. We were willing to negotiate with the applicants. Timescales, as you've all been made aware previously, are an issue for us. Unfortunately, this actually is one of our younger applications. The non-determination period had only just expired. Not that this is a great defence, but we have other applications which we are kind of moving forward, negotiating, having more positive discussions with applicants. But the decision was taken in this instance that the applicants weren't willing to do that, and they've moved forward with the appeal. I would say that Councillor Barnes, you might want to refer from making judgment, just because it's likely that the application could be brought before committee to seek your resolution on how to defend the appeal against non-determination, in which case you'd still need to consider an open mind if you were on committee at that time. But yeah, that's what I really can say about that for the time being.
Okay, thank you.
On Ashwood, this is an applicant who has modified his design considerably, modified his layout, and has the backing of the parish council. I really find it quite difficult to understand why we've got ourselves into this situation.
Sam, do you feel that we've not responded quickly enough? I don't know why the applicant has decided to go for non-determination.
Well, the applicant feels that we haven't responded quickly enough. Clearly, that's why they've gone with the non-determination. We had explained the situation to them. We have set out previously what our concerns were. Like I said, it's our intention, depending ultimately on the recommendation that we settle on, that this comes to committee to agree the resolution of how the appeal is defended. But I'm happy with the way that officers are dealing with the application today.
Well, there's the answer, John. I think we've just got to keep a closer eye on it and see what happens, and see what the officers are putting up for the appeal, if they put anything up at all. All right, okay. Clearly at the moment, because of the position with the pressure on the planning department, there will be a few more that pop up as non-determination, and that's not great, but that's the way it is. I suspect that the PINS won't be making a decision on this any quicker than the planning authority would, but that's life at the moment. This takes us just to the final point, which is to note the next site inspections, which is the 18th of May, 8:30. I'm pleased that we are doing proper site inspections again with everyone involved. I have one last thing to do. Sam Coleman is going to be stepping away from the planning committee from now, and I want to thank him for his contribution over time. we shall miss your point of view, and but understand that, the changes that need to be made, and I'm sure you're probably going to be a substitute, I imagine. So I'm sure we'll see you again. But to say thank you very much for all your comments and contributions. Councillor Mary Barnes, I think, wanted to say something.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I raised during my my bit on Hilbery the idea that we should be looking at it, or making a special case of looking at these 106s, which then lose because of the claim of non-viability. Could we possibly take that stage further, please? I mean, I don't know whether to put this to the vote or whether we just keep it going, but I really do feel that we do need some sort of policy, which clearly at the moment we haven't got.
To do what?
Well, to make sure that when we first look at a planning application, that
I see.
We know that the viability exercise has actually been carried out to the officers' satisfaction, right, so that we don't have any more of these Hilbery and Strandmeadow efforts.
All right. Well, firstly, thank you for the comment. Really appreciate that, and I'm sure your view is shared. It's not an item agendaed for today, so there's no discussion to be had. But I will take that up. It's something to do with policy, and I know that that's actually something that's going to be reviewed with the core strategy to build in those conditions. So they are working on it, and this has come about as a result of these viabilities. So we can't really discuss it or make a decision today, but be assured that that is the case, and we can have a further discussion later. And on that basis, I'm going to thank everyone for the participation today. I think we moved through the applications as quickly as we could, giving them sufficient time for more important ones. So thank you very much to everyone. Goodbye.